the Groton Town Council Committee of the Whole meeting. All councilors are present with the exception of Councilor Melendez. So we have a quorum with 8 councilors. It is 6:30. Oh, there's Councilor Melendez. Excellent. So we have a quorum with all 9 councilors. It is 6:36 p.m. All right, calendar and communications. Councilor Baumgart.
No report.
Councilor Parker?
No report.
Councilor Franco?
No report, thank you.
Councilor Aubrey?
No real report. Maine is beautiful this week.
Councilor Bordelon?
Thank you. Actually, now I'm looking at my notes. Was that long-term recovery meeting since our last council?
Yes, it was October
Yeah.
6th.
Yeah, so I attended the long-term recovery meeting where we had representation from different business owners within our town. I thought there was a lot of ideas generated and a lot of great discussion. So looking forward to see what new things will come out from that meeting over the next several months and weeks. Just a reminder to everybody, it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month as October starts to come to a close. And I think it's definitely, as we talk about COVID and other public health crisis that complicate our town and our community directly, we do have some of the highest breast cancer rates in the town in this area in Connecticut as a whole. And so just, everyone stay up to date on your examinations. Also want to again talk about Marching Band. They have their upcoming event, their home show, October 23rd. They have been posting a lot of the information online. They're looking for donations, help, volunteers to be able to be the host for the other towns that will be coming in on that day. And I encourage everybody to come out and support the high school marching band. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilor Melendez?
Nothing to report.
Thank you. I forwarded a communication from a gentleman that works for the New London Homeless Hospitality Center regarding people that need housing that live in the town of Groton, and he indicated that there's one gentleman that would be open to being housed if there was a voucher available, and I made a suggestion that if there's not a voucher available, that he should be in touch with the town because we just made available a pot of near-term needs money, and so perhaps it could be funded from there. The long-term recovery meeting, as Councilor Bordelon mentioned, was on October 6th, and we had, there were 25 invites extended to local businesses, and I think we had about 15 that came out, and I just want to thank all of those who attended. And we pretty much listened. It was a listening meeting to hear what the business owners needed and how they were impacted by COVID, and kind of to help us inform what we're going to be doing next. I also forwarded an email that on the 26th, we're going to take care of a typo that was in the resolution regarding the bond extension. So that'll be added on. Mr. Burt, do you have any communications?
I do not.
Okay, and I see here that the meeting minutes will be provided for Committee of the Whole, so we'll have 2 sets of minutes on that evening.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are on to new business. This is 2021-693 Thames Valley Council for Community Action Update. And this evening we have Deb Monahan with us. Ms. Monahan? Is she a panelist and able to speak?
Okay, I think you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I also have some staff on as well, so they're going to help with the presentation. But first, let me start by thanking you all for this opportunity to speak with you for a few minutes this evening. My name is Deborah Monahan. I'm the CEO of TVCCA. Joining me are Megan Brown, who is the Chief Operations Officer of TVCCA, Debbie Poirier, who is the Director of our...
We lost Ms. Monahan.
Switch to panelist.
Hold on one second, please, Ms. Monahan. If you can hear, we've lost your sound.
Looks like she pressed her mute button.
Ms. Monahan?
No, I'm not pressing nothing, but stranger things have happened. Okay,
You're
now
back
Debbie
now.
Poirier
That's
here,
good.
and Megan, Okay, all right. Thank you all again. Okay, so now you see Debbie Poirier. She's the director of our Little Learners Education Program. Megan Brown and Andrea Watson is also, let's see if I can get my picture back here. Start my video. Let's try that again. Okay, there we go. And then Andrea Watson is also on the call, and she's the director of our Head Start, Early Head Start program. I don't know if you can see her. Anyways, so again, thank you very much for this opportunity. Town of Groton has always been very supportive of TVCCA. Thank you very much for designating Juliette Parker a few years ago to be a board member on TVCCA's board. Very important for us to have municipal representation. So tonight I'm going to share some things. The intent tonight is pretty much to share some information with you, answer any questions you may have. If you've got any thoughts, please share those with us, and then hopefully garner your support for what we're looking to do. So let me take a step backwards for a moment. For close to 50 years, and might even be a little bit longer than 50 years, TVCC has had a relationship with the town of Groton. This is our presentation here. And we're thankful again and very appreciative to the town for that. That relationship has primarily been through the provision of buildings for our child care program. Initially, around 50 years ago, it started with one building which served Head Start children. Over the years, we moved to 2 additional buildings. These buildings are located at 36, 38, and 40 Central Avenue. Those buildings are owned by the town and leased to TVCCA, and that lease runs through June 30th of 2026. Currently, we pay you all a whopping $3 a year for the use of those facilities. We also pay you for a prorated amount of the town's insurance premium on those buildings. So in other words, you have to insure them because they are your buildings. We pay whatever prorated amount that comes to, and the town bills us for that. Other than that, though, TVCCA assumes all of the costs associated with the building. So we pay for the heat, the utilities, the maintenance, all of the upkeep, anything associated with those buildings. Those buildings are old. I tried to recollect, and I've been with TVCCA for a long time, I tried to recollect when those buildings were replaced. I'm not sure if it was probably mid to late 80s, maybe. So let's say they're at least 30 years old, could be even a little bit older. And the challenge that we're faced with right now is that they are starting to cost us a lot of money. So what we find is we're repairing old buildings, and it's our hope that over the course of the next year or so, we can leverage resources to replace those. So back in 2012, I started conversations with town officials at that time that we needed to replace the buildings. Resource in 2012, 9 years ago, and towards the end of 2012, you will recall the state experienced the significant tragedy of Sandy Hook, and that kind of changed everybody's focus, if you will, relative to facilities. So we were able to leverage resources to secure the buildings, and so we've secured them. We've certainly, like I said, kept them up. But CHIFA, which is the Connecticut Health and Educational Facilities Authority, is a bonding authority for child care centers, never came through with any additional resources. So, as I said, over the years, the last few years, we probably have put in over $200,000 worth of repairs and fixing up, and we are faced with some significant challenges there. Megan, I think you need to go back to slide 4, because at this point I'm going to stop talking and let both Debbie and Andrea take a few minutes to explain to you the programming that actually takes place at those 3 centers. Debbie, you want to go first?
Sure, good evening. So I am speaking specifically about the Little Learners program. We currently operate 2 of the 3 buildings that we are in with you. Little Learners is a comprehensive child care program. We serve infants, toddlers, and preschool-age children. So our children come to us at 6 weeks, and they can stay right through kindergarten. This definitely limits the number of transitions that a family has to make in the educational life of their child before they hit public school. Our program is open 10 hours a day. We're open 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday through Friday, year-round. I think the most important thing to realize about us as an agency is we do much more than just child care. We are able to provide the families we serve with lots of resources to help support not only the child but the family as a whole. We are a community action agency, so the resources that our families can receive in terms of other social services that they need are vast within our agency. So our program does have 56 children at any given time, which is the maximum capacity we can have in those buildings, and they are full all day, every day.
Thank you, Deb. Could the town of Groton staff make Andrea Watson a presenter so I can have her speak? She can't unmute herself.
Just one moment, please. They're taking care of that now for you.
Okay, good. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. If you go in the, yeah, stop sharing maybe. There you go. Andrea Watson, did you say?
Yes, ma'am.
Andrea TVCCA, there it is. Try it now and see if it works, Ms. Watson.
Yes, it does. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm the director of the Early Head Start and Head Start program. Out of our Groton location, we have 2 Head Start classrooms. Our Head Start program services children ages 3 to 5. At the Groton location, this is a part day, part year slot. And we have 2 classrooms there that operate 4.5 hours a day from September until May. And each classroom services 15 children. So we have a total of 30 children from Head Start in that building. We also have an Early Head Start program, which is a home visiting program with prenatal moms to children up to the age of 3. And they do weekly home visits as well as offer weekly play groups. And the weekly play groups are typically held in the Groton location. And then the Groton location offers office space for the Early Head Start home visitors. So that's the services that we provide out of Groton.
And as both Deb and Andrea have said in terms of their programs, the curriculum that we use is evidence-based. The children all get nutrition services. They get breakfast, snacks, lunches. We have family supports for all of the families. So we bring more than just a child care program. If they need energy assistance, if they need assistance with making sure they're housed and everything like that, all of those services are brought to those families. And as we say on the slide, they have access to other TVCCA programs and any other human services programs. So some of the challenges that we are faced with, so you may or may not know that these are 3 separate buildings. Only one of the buildings has a full kitchen. So that's where, again, they can actually do some food prep there. In the other kitchens, we have to, kind of work within limited space, and we do have a commissary that provides many of the meals for those children. The middle building, 38 Central Avenue, was not originally built on the site for childcare. It actually was originally a police substation. So we are doing classes in that building, but it wasn't built with children in mind. As both directors have indicated, all of the buildings have very limited space. We know we could serve more families, but right now we can't. And as I said to you, those buildings were built a good 30 years ago, so there is some limited Americans with Disability Act accessibility. So this is a picture. If you haven't driven by there lately, you can see the three buildings as best as we could get it. You've got, the little one in the middle was the substation. To the left is the center that actually was built originally as a child care center, and then kind of tucked a little bit towards the back is the third building. The three separate buildings present major challenges to us in terms of operations. We have two other large centers, one in Taffville. We're going to show you a picture of that. Go to that, Megan, so I can show the top. Okay, so the top picture here that you're looking at is our Taffville Center. That is a state-of-the-art early childhood center that was constructed in Taffville. Believe it or not, it was 20 years ago, and it was built with children in mind. Every aspect of it was built with children in mind, but it's one large facility. It's much easier to take care of children. That way staff have an opportunity to be next door to each other with classrooms, and coverage is always available. The lower building with the white fence in front, in that is our Bayonet Street facility located in London. Again, another large site. And the Taffville and this Bayonet Street facility serve anywhere between 120 and 150 children. The Bayonet Street facility was another one that we operate in London, as I said, with the same benefits. One large center, a lot of support staff there, as well as the teaching staff. That's kind of our vision for Groton, to see if we can't secure additional resources to replace those three buildings with hopefully a state-of-the-art center built with children in mind. So they say that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. For TVCCA, this is our first step. I reached out to, John at Town Hall to share with him the thought and the idea of, gee, I think the timing might be right, whether it be with federal dollars, state dollars, other dollars coming into our state through some of the relief acts that have been approved by Congress. The timing might be right to leverage the resources that we are going to need in order to, replace those three buildings with one state-of-the-art center that can serve not only the current children that we're serving, but hopefully some more children as well. So what I'm looking for tonight is just, hopefully I can answer questions if you have any. Maybe just the green light and the thumbs up to yes, continue to pursue this. We're, like I said, exploring all kinds of avenues, but didn't want to get too far down that road until we had kind of your blessing. It's definitely my commitment to the town to keep you, all the town, informed every step of the way. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll turn to anyone and try to answer any questions that come up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again for this opportunity.
Certainly. Thank you for being here. I'm going to ask Mr. Burt if you would give any comment on this as far as what source of funding would be appropriate for the town if the council so desired to move ahead with a different building? Could the ARPA funds be used? Would it be bonding? What is your...
I think we'd have to see what all dollars are out there. ARPA might be able to be used for an extent, but it's not going to likely cover all of it. Who knows with the new, infrastructure package or whatever else comes out. Apparently, early childhood is going to be a big focus of that. So I think it's seeing what all gets passed and probably multiple sources to put together. But I'm very supportive of the figuring this out.
Councilor Bordelon.
Thank you. I'm familiar with your program, and I've did a lot of outreach with battered women and single moms who have utilized your services. And I can't speak enough right now the importance of allowing women and men and families to have safe childcare, healthy locations that meet the needs of children in our community. And from the safety aspect of having 3 separate buildings, it's a no-brainer. We just were talking, as I serve on the long-term recovery committee, the number one thing I heard over and over from the businesses and the staff shortages is people that need affordable childcare. That has been brought to the forefront in the midst of COVID and our crisis, and this is definitely a need that our town can meet. We recently had a assessment from the state where we fell, I believe, 19th or the top 25 of 169 towns, and we fell being in that category as distressed. And in those areas were identified areas in which something like this and improving this and expanding this program to be state-of-the-art and allowing for more children to be able to be part of this program would fill the void of not only our businesses, but the needs of our families that need to return to work. As you stated today, your program is maxed out, and if I did my math correct, you guys service 86 children, is what you currently write. What would that look like if we could service double that in this town and the accessibility? That would open up tons of opportunities for family and as well as children who are going into elementary school prepared and having that exposure to curriculum-based learning and not just daycare. And that is, I applaud you guys for all that you do, and you have my full support on this. There was a tax that was going to be placed upon a sellers, and that money then could go to something. And I think this is a great example of where that tax could go to help our community with infrastructure and the needs of the children to have an enrichment center where they can grow. So this is exactly when I say the money coming in from the ARPA funds need to directly impact the people, and that's what it was meant to do, was to fall into the hands of the folks who need it most, and this would be an example of that need. So I thank you guys, and I would love to set up with John. I know with COVID it might be hard, but I'd love to come down for a tour, after hours even, and just see these facilities. I think that would help to really bring it to life. But I have been in there, and I appreciate all that you do for our community, and childcare is the foundation for everything for our community. So I think this is something we definitely want to look into and fund and provide and move our town forward. Thank you.
Well, all I can say is thank you so much. My intent is to leverage as much resources as TVCCA can to bring to bear there. John and I will stay in continual contact as to that. My intent was just hopefully that you guys would still lease us at least the land. Maybe 50 years. I won't be here in 50 years, believe it or not, but definitely lease the land for, a period of time. We can leverage the resources, put something on that land. John and I will continue this conversation. We just feel that TVCCA just feels that now is the time to really kind of go after this with all of our passion. We have a beautiful center in Taffel. We showed you that picture. You can go up and see Taffel. It's gorgeous. If you want to just go over the bridge and look at our Bayonet Street facility, that was the old American Steakhouse years ago. That was renovated. We took it over about 18 years ago, re-renovated it, added on to it. And those are state-of-the-art childcare centers. Groton deserves that. That's my humble opinion. Groton deserves that.
Thank you. Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you so much, Deborah and team, for coming before us this evening. Really outstanding presentation, and I think you articulated the need that exists in our community, and certainly would agree with Councilor Bordelon that you have my support, and I hope the entire council support in your endeavors to construct a new facility. As our manager mentioned, there could be a lot of dollars that our community can leverage. Hopefully down in Washington, we can see some movement on the human infrastructure piece, a significant investment in child care. Certainly, with investment in the Build Back Better legislation that would grant universal pre-K and a sliding scale to funding pre-K so that our families that are most in need can actually afford the child care. As much as $100 in savings a week can go a long way in really extending families' paychecks, and at a time when I think every family can certainly use those dollars to pay for whatever other needs they have in their own lives. So again, thank you so much for coming to us tonight. My question is, I understand you have 3 programs, the Little Learners, Head Start, and Early Head Start program. And just my question is, how many of those kids are Groton residents, and or how many Groton children do you directly service?
I'm going to throw that one to those 2 directors. Deborah, Andrea, not sure.
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. When we did our last United Way report last year, we were at 95 or 6% of Groton families that we're serving. So almost all of our families live in Groton.
Excuse me.
And you had mentioned that you're maximized right now. You don't have any openings, which is it's not a good problem to have, but certainly it just goes to show the need. There is a need that is being met, but there is still much more services to divvy out, throughout our community. What is the wait list on, for maybe some families that are right on that line that maybe could benefit from this? Or that could directly benefit from a TVCCA program?
So I'm going to let them answer that, Andre, but one of the things that definitely this center would create opportunities for would be infant toddler. That's where the highest demand is. People can't wait till their child is age 3 to go back to work. And we find that the greatest demand is in the infant toddler realm, but I don't know, Deb or Andrea, if you've got anything to add to that.
This is a hard time to collect good data because we have to remember we're in the middle of a pandemic still, and parents aren't all 100% ready to come back. Before March of 2020, when things started to shut down, we had about 116 infant toddlers, so children under 3, families on our waiting list. That has changed a lot since the pandemic. So people are still on the list, but families are saying they don't necessarily want childcare right now. Keep me on the list. I'm not ready to go back to work, or I can't find childcare after school for my school-age child. So there was over 100 families pre-COVID on the wait list for us.
No, and I think it's really interesting hearing some mothers in particular feeling or having to make that choice. Do I stay at home with our child and sacrifice an income, or do I return to work and either find childcare myself and have to pay that expense, or ideally bring them to a program such as yours. So certainly anything we can do to open additional slots is something I think we all should pursue. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Councilor Aubry?
I'm not familiar with the land that you're talking about. What piece of land are we talking about?
Midway.
Oh, this is located on Central Avenue, Midway Oval?
Oh, it's rebuilding something in that area.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just wondering if, as we go forward with the school across the street and all the different things that have come up that would be a possibility there, maybe we could nicely retrofit out of that building to truly accommodate what you need. I'm not suggesting that you just go into what's there, but we might be able to take a wing of that building and make it into what you really need. And if we might be able to do a lot more with the same amount of money, rather than having to build, but to retrofit. And I think that's something that we should definitely look at for that school property. So just a thought, and I think it might, also time-wise, might be something that could move along a little quicker.
Yeah, I think, and thank you, ma'am. I wish we were in person, because I love people. I wish we were in person, but yeah, we're open to any suggestions the town has that thinks that we could make this work. You know, if we do construction there's going to be some logistical things we have to definitely consider, because how we build it on the land while we still serve families, definitely we've wrestled with that. So if there's an alternative site that collectively we can work to leverage the resources to serve, 120 or more kids in the Groton area, TDCCA is ready to roll up their sleeves and work side by side with you.
Well, I think that would be definitely something worth looking at. Might make it a whole lot easier for everybody. And you can give me a hug anytime you see me.
Okay, thank you. I'll give it to Juliet and she'll give it to you.
All right.
Mr. Bird, I think it's saying you raised your hand. Did you?
Yeah, I see when we lost internet connectivity right before the meeting, the host switched to Counselor Heed, and they've now got my name under him. So
Oh.
he's me.
So Councilor
Well, give me a
Heed
second, I
raised
can
his
change his
hand.
name on there.
Okay. Councilor Melendez, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, I too am 100% in support of moving forward with, trying to fund this project and finding creative ways to improve your facilities. I would just like to implore the council to reconsider the increase of the conveyance tax, because that money could be used to offset the cost of this project. And I do think that this project is essential in 2021. So you have my support. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Councilor Zepari is Mr. Bird at this point. That's okay. Councilor Zepari, you have your hand up, sir?
Yeah, I'd just like to say you asked for a consensus of our feelings. I think you're doing great work. I think it's important work. I would be in favor of supporting you with a long-term lease on the land. I don't know what kind of other money you're going to need, but I would, being the cranky old guy that I am, I'd probably be a little bit stodgy about that, but I don't think you're going to have to worry about me much longer. At any rate, I just want to join the others who said congratulations on the work that you're doing. I think it's important, and Godspeed.
Thank you. I'm going to speak at this point. Yes, I concur with the other speakers. We appreciate the work that you've done for the community, and I hope you can continue to provide these services and hopefully expand the services. I understand there is a big demand. In the past, we've talked with Riverfront Children's Center, and they are in the same situation where they're waitlisted with kids, and they just don't have the space to be able to offer care to any more families. So if there's anything that the town can do to facilitate the expansion, I certainly would be in support of that. I think we've had some interesting, good ideas here as far as kind of brainstorming, thinking outside the box with Claude Chester property and the conveyance tax use. So I certainly hope that the council going forward will pursue this and continue the support for you. It will be a new council by the time there would be any action. So I'm hopeful that the new council coming in will also be supportive of the work you've done. So thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Thank you again for this opportunity. We have been in contact with Congressman Courtney's office, and as well as the Office of Early Childhood. We're reaching out to try to leverage the resources, whether they land in a Claude Chester school, in another site, or wherever. I think, like I said, we stand ready to work with you because this is for your children, and we just. It's something I just feel so strongly about for the children of Groton. We did it in Norwich, we did it in New London, and we're going to do it in Groton for sure. So thank you again, all of you, for your kind words tonight, for your very good questions, and for your support.
Councilor Parker wanted to speak, so Councilor Parker.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. And Deb and I have been talking about this, and my kids started off at TVCCA at Central Avenue and 20 some odd years ago. So this hits home. This is where my kids started off at. They've helped my kids grow. So anything we can support TVCCA on this building, I full-heartedly support this. So, and Deb and the team are wonderful to work with. That if I've had a person reach out to me for help, I can call them at any point to get the resources I need for the person anywhere throughout Connecticut. So thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
Very nice.
Thank you, Julia. Kind words.
Councilor, just want to see if there are any of the first-time speakers, Councilor Heed or Franco. If not, we'll go to second-time speakers. Councilor Bordelon.
Yes, thank you. I just had a quick question. Well, I thought too, when Councilor Overy had stated Claude Chester, I also thought of SP Butler as another possibility as a temporary space use if a new construction had to be built. So just really looking at all open space that's available temporarily and maybe picking which one is in better shape that could better suit the needs as a temporary hub before the new building would be constructed. So that's a great thought, Councilor Overy with Claude Chester, and I just thought of SP Butler as well. Just something to put into the record and consider. It wouldn't be a long-term stay, obviously, but it would be a good way to keep the program going. I would hate for it to lapse. And is there any thoughts of possibly increasing it? Or does TVCCA have any programs because of the need that's been addressed with childcare as a whole, and a lot of the programs being boxed? Is there any move for TVCCA to expand its program for maybe 6 to 8-year-olds that are school age and full time for before after school care, enrichment and tutoring and support? I know in some other states that don't necessarily use TVCCA, but they use other programs that are similar. They are starting to expand, and in that expansion, they're opening up where buses are dropping kids off who need longer care for parents who work second shift, and they're providing them a snack, a place to have a nap, helping them with homework, almost like a big brother, big sister program. So I just wanted to see where the direction was moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good question. I'll start, and Deb, certainly you can jump in. We do. I think our biggest constraint right now has been the space, so we haven't really given that a whole lot of thought. If you know what I mean? I think that would be something. If there was a need, we would look and certainly work with the town to see what we could leverage. Deb, I know that you have a little more experience with some of the after-school stuff, before and after-school stuff.
I think, as the other Deb said, it's definitely something we could look at if there was a need. In the past, when we have done surveys, it's not as much of a need as people think. A lot of parents find some solution for that, time frame between 3:30 and 5:30 or 6 p.m. So a lot of programs wind up opening to do that and then closing because they can't get the numbers. So it's something we'd have to explore and find out. We do not get funding for that currently. All our funding comes from the Office of Early Childhood and the Federal Head Start program for children before they enter school. So we'd have to look at the need and could we sustain it and would it be affordable for families? But we'll explore anything that there's a need for and see what we can do with it.
For sure.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions from the council. We thank you for coming out and for the work you do, and looking forward to hearing more about your perspectives.
Thank you.
I will definitely keep John posted, and as he determines the need, I'll be before you with sharing of information. Thank you again.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yep.
I'll also reach out to those who might want a tour. I'll coordinate with
Yes.
Ms. Monahan.
Excellent. Thank you.
Definitely, absolutely. Okay, thank you again, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay, we're on to 2021-684, the housing market study. And this is discussion purposes only. And I believe we have Mr. Reiner and Mr. Bronk on the line.
Our regular members?
I'm not sure if they are able to speak or not.
They are online. They should
Okay,
be able to speak.
great.
Let me double check that.
Mr. Bronk and Mr. Reiner, if you're there, Mr. Bird is just making sure that you're a panelist and you're able to do your thing. So give us one moment, please. He's just promoting you to panelist now. So Mr. Reiner should be in, and I think Mr. Bronk has moved over as well. And let's see.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. Mr. Burt, did you
John
move?
Reiner, Director of Planning and Development.
Excuse me 1 second. Did you move Mr. Stevens? Oh, yes, you did. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, Mr. Reiner, to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure everyone was in and able to speak. Thank you for joining us, and I'll be quiet now.
Well, all right. Thank you very much, everyone. Again, John Reiner, Director of Planning and Development Services. With me tonight is also Paige Bronk, our Economic and Community Development Manager, as well as Dan Stevens from Comoin & Associates. And I think Dan's going to share his screen and bring up a PowerPoint presentation that he's going to go through tonight. But what I wanted to talk a little bit about before I hand it over to Dan, but Dan, at any point in time, feel free to share your screen and we'll get that up.
Sure, thanks, John.
Yeah. So one of the questions that we have been getting a lot in Groton was, we're talking about proposed development, housing development within Groton, and how much is enough, or is what was being proposed or even discussed not enough? To that point, as of right now, of all of the school projects that we're promoting and marketing and that we have under contract, the only one that's really, moving forward right now is the Sealy School, but all the others are still in different phases of development, or pre-development, I should say. But along those lines, we were getting a lot of questions about, how much housing does Groton really need? You've heard us all talk a lot about our large workforce and how 80%, actually, I think it's about 82% of our workforce actually commutes here. And we wanted to look at and try to understand the market need within Groton and the types of housing that were here. So we've been working with Comoin on a number of projects over the last few years, and this we really wanted them to do a deep dive, which included interviewing real estate market experts within our market area, looking at a housing supply analysis, a housing market trends analysis, looking at competitive assessments and understanding the challenges to our market, as also understanding what the housing demand is here, so that we can then have some understanding of those numbers. And as we start to think about how we grow and develop over time, especially with our plan of conservation and development, which we do have to start updating sometime in the next year or two, once again, we want to be better informed about housing in the region. So that was the general purpose and what we started off with. So we've been working with Dan and his team on this for about 6 months. And with that, I will hand this over to Dan. But again, I think he'll give a brief presentation and overview of this product, of this housing market study. The housing study is currently up on the Town of Groton webpage. And come tomorrow morning, this PowerPoint presentation will also be up on our webpage. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Dan.
All right. Well, thank you, John. Thank you all for the opportunity to join you virtually this evening. As John mentioned, my name is Dan Stevens with Camoin Associates. If you're not too familiar with us, we are a full-service economic development consulting firm. And as John mentioned, we have a long-standing relationship with the town, and we're grateful for the opportunity to have worked again with the town on this, pretty comprehensive housing study. So a lot of data, information in the study. We're just going to kind of touch on some of the results briefly, but there's a lot of great information packed into that study. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump into this. Before we kind of hit on the key findings of this study, I wanted to walk through some of the recent trends that Groton's been experiencing that are really telling the story about the housing market and how we've gotten to where we are. So starting with the basics, this is the town of Groton's population, what's been happening from 2001 up until today. And you can see that downward trend from 2011 to 2021. Over the next 10 years, all of the models and projections are telling us that that's going to continue to decline. So, continued population loss is a real threat for the town of Groton. And, there are a lot of factors at play when it comes to population growth and decline, but housing is one of those key components of that story and of those trends. So, status quo, continued population loss is kind of what the models are showing us. But it's not all doom and gloom here. So I like this graph because it couldn't be any more clear, the two diverging directions here. So the blue line is, what those projections and the models tell us the population's going to do within the region. So we're talking about the greater region here, but kind of mirroring what we're seeing in the town of Groton. But then you see this top line, kind of the orange line diverging, and that's the growth line. And so there is this potential and this outlook for more positive both economic and population growth in the region. And so there's an opportunity for Groton to essentially grab a share of that growth.
Recording in progress.
And housing is, again, an important and critical piece of that puzzle. So John threw out this stat, but I think it's worth reiterating here because that is a very substantial proportion. So this is the 82% of jobs in the town being filled by people that are commuting into the town. So these are folks that are living elsewhere and commuting essentially on a daily basis into town and going home at the end of the day outside of town. So that's that 21,000, about 21,700 people commuting in on a daily basis. And so that 82%, by the way, is something that's been trending upwards. So it was down in the 70s% range, and that's kind of creeped up and crossed that 80%. So it's trending more towards this situation where you have lots of people coming in to fill the jobs that are here in town. And so, the blue box here, local workers are going to continue to live in surrounding communities and, bringing their paychecks home with them and, spending money in their home communities rather than the town of Groton. So there's very real economic considerations with these types of commuting patterns. And so just to emphasize that a little bit more, here's just an overview of what the most common types of jobs are within the town of Groton and the median earnings associated with those jobs. So these are just median, right? So half of the folks, would be earning more than that salary or wage figure shown there. And this is very significant. There are lots of towns that would love to be able to boast job and wage figures that look anything like this. So architecture and engineering occupations, a lot of that driven by electric boat, over 3,000 of those jobs with median earnings, getting close to 110,000, management occupations, business and financial operations occupations. So there's all of these folks, high wage earners that are working in the town, but again, they're commuting in, they're leaving the town at the end of the day, and they're doing most of their spending in other communities. One of the other things that we found after getting into this study is when we look back about the past decade or so, there's really been an underproduction of housing. So, not the level of housing construction that would have been necessary to, essentially keep pace with the rest of the region. To be able to have kept pace, that's that 500 more or more units would have been needed to be built. So, really substantially lower housing development activity relative to the region and some of your peer communities here in the region. And so, our status quo, the trend continues. That's going to continue to be the case where, that housing development continues to occur in other communities, and Groton, essentially missing out on that development. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities we uncovered, but in terms of the housing situation that Groton is in now, there's really a strong mismatch between where the supply is and where the demand is. And so, what you see here are some of these, current and future demand drivers. So when we talk about demand, we're talking about, demand for housing units. And we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the nuanced demand that's out there. But when we look at, what are those drivers of demand, these are the 5 kind of key drivers, and really the top 3 are the big drivers, but all of these are very relevant to what the housing need, demand, opportunity is in the town of Groton. So new electric boat workers, with the new hiring of electric boat, pretty substantial impacts on the housing market and the housing need. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a minute. Rental upgraders, kind of a self-explanatory name there, but, we've gotten into the data, and as we're talking with folks, it's really clear that on a regional basis, even, not just the town, there's an undersupply of quality, modern rental units. And so you have people that are in types of housing, rental housing that, they would upgrade out of if the desired housing was actually available. And so that's what this category is here. And then we talked about the commuters, the incoming commuters. There's certainly an opportunity, when you see high commuting numbers like that, you always start to think about the opportunities, to capture those folks. And, in situations like this, it's housing is part of the issue why that number is so large. So, if there were the right types of housing attractive to those folks that are commuting in, we would expect a portion of those commuters, to purchase or rent that type of housing, should it be available. New workers in the region, right, going back to that graph with the regional growth, there's, it's not just electric boat, there's positive things happening in the local economy. There's job growth and, blue tech jobs being created in town of Groton and surrounding areas. And so, there is this kind of positive outlook, positive potential for future job growth, which again is going to contribute to, the housing need and housing demand. And then, to a lesser extent, but still worth noting here, we also considered, the obsolescence of housing. As time goes on, a certain number of units kind of become obsolete every year and need to be replaced, and so that's what that category is. I'm going to talk a little bit about electric boat because it is so important to the housing picture. And so as part of this study, we've had conversations with representatives from Electric Boat. We've looked at the hiring numbers, and this is kind of what it boils down to. They're increasing their workforce by about 2,000 jobs over the next decade or so. But to hit those job numbers, to add an overall net increase of 2,000 jobs, they're looking to hire about 15,000 workers, and that's factoring in, folks, essentially turnover, a large portion of which is expected to be retirees. So, a lot of new people have to be hired, not just to replace workers, but then to also add those jobs. So. I won't get into the complicated math that goes behind this, but when we think about what it means for the housing demand, we're thinking about those new hires outside of the region. They're not living in the region, they don't have housing, and therefore that's going to drive a portion of the housing demand. Some are certainly not going to live in Groton. Some will live elsewhere in the region, but there is this great opportunity, right? Groton has the locational advantage and has the potential to, we would say, capture a large share of that housing demand from those workers. And as part of this, we factored in this kind of retiree piece of it. So, right, not all workers who retire are going to pack up and move out of town. A large portion are going to stay. Some are going to stay on a part-time basis. But, right, just because someone retires, it doesn't mean a housing unit is opening up and available for the next worker to, pull up their U-Haul and move in. So we have to factor in kind of those retirees and other workers that stay in the region. And so that's contributing again to the housing demand associated with Electric Boat. And so you see here at the bottom, that's a big number, 1,900 units. It's over 10 years, but still 190 annually just from these Electric Boat hires. And that's the opportunity just for the town of Groton. So, the regional number is even bigger than that. So this is really the outcome of our analysis. So this is the housing demand over the next 10 years. So this is what we believe the market can support, based on current and projected conditions in the town of Groton during that time frame. And so the big number, the 5,260 units, is the housing development opportunity really within the town of Groton over this 10-year time frame. And that is a big number. There's no, disguising that. But that's the nature of the magnitude of the housing demand and the unmet demand that's expected. And so you see here we've kind of allocated the demand by those different types of households. So the new Electric Boat workers, that's that 1,900 figure. And that's the largest component of the housing demand that we've identified here. But the rental upgraders, again, these are the folks that would really prefer quality, modern rental apartments, and if they were available in Groton, they would snatch them up. And that's 1,800 units, again, over 10 years. The incoming commuters, right? So we've examined the commuting data, and even if the town were able to capture a relatively small portion of those in-commuters, and what we believe would be realistic, it would mean 1,200 potential units of housing. And then you see the new workers in the region, a little bit smaller piece of the pie here, 300 potential units. And then that living in obsolete units, about 260 over 10 years or so. And that's really kind of the need to replace low quality obsolete housing in the community. So John had mentioned this early on as one of the objectives of the study was to, understand with the development projects that are proposed, that are planned, both within the town of Groton and within the region. What does that mean for this opportunity? Is there really going to be any potential to build housing if all of these projects were to move forward? And so in this little graphic you see here, the blue houses are kind of the portion that, the portion of that opportunity that would be met by those current and planned projects. So the left over here, the green houses in this little graphic, it's about 4,200 units of housing opportunity that are currently not going to be met, just reviewing the projects that are out there, that are proposed, that are known. And so, the answer, to this question is, there's plenty of housing development opportunity, market potential, even after a substantial number of units are built. And that, 1,060, that assumes that all of those projects move forward, and that's typically not often the case. So, the bottom line here is that there's expected to be significant unmet housing demand. And even when we look at the regional, on a regional basis, kind of what's typically being developed in the region on an annual basis, that pace of housing is not going to be enough to keep up with the housing demand. The demand is really that substantial that unless the pace of development picks up just on a regional basis, we would expect some of this demand to go unmet in the future. We've also taken a look at, what are the types of housing that would be in demand. So there's a couple different ways to look at that. So starting with, rental versus for sale housing. So for sale, typically single family homes, but, things like condos and other types of things would fit into that category. And for rent, primarily talking about apartments. So, it's about a 60% to 40% split, with 60% of the demand, so the greater portion of the demand picture being for those rental units. Now we've also taken a look at the demand by price point and income levels. And that's what you see under that pie chart there. So the household income, those earning less than $50,000, about 360 units for sale demand, 540 units for apartments or rental units. But when you look at the demand from those with incomes more than $50,000, it's a lot more substantial. It's important to have housing across income, across the income spectrum. But it is, worth noting here, and kind of going back to some of those high-wage jobs, that there is this kind of untapped higher end of the market, that's an opportunity. So, home values, in this case would be more than about $200,000, and rent more than about $1,250. There's some big demand numbers at those higher income points. And just quickly, to give you a sense of, what it is we're actually, talking about when, we're talking about these housing units. Here's to give you a sense, so there's market rate apartments, and this is kind of what a typical mixed-use development looks like, with, nice apartments above, some commercial on the bottom, duplex, triplex, townhomes. That's something that did kind of emerge, and a lot of communities kind of are lacking this type of housing, and there is demand out there for this kind of middle income housing, kind of a little bit more dense than the single family. But of course, this is the traditional single family homes. expected to be continued demand for those, and particularly at, at high price points. Again, there's demand across the price and income spectrum. But one of the things I think that did stand out was, at least on the single family side of things, was, particularly high value, high priced single family homes. And senior housing was certainly, again, something that emerged from this with, an aging population, and a lot of communities are facing this need and this demand for senior housing. Senior housing is another one of those ones that's kind of a critical piece of the housing market picture, because often seniors, as they're aging, prefer to stay in their community and, often want to stay in their own homes, and that's fine. But many, would prefer to, go to someplace that's less maintenance, a little bit easier upkeep. But often, there aren't those units available to move into in their community. And so, they may stay in their single family home, even if they would prefer to be elsewhere. But when you have appropriate options for seniors that are desirable and attractive, these quality options that they're interested in moving into, that does open up single family units for families to move in. And so it's part of kind of a healthy market cycle to have those that senior housing in the community. So this is my last slide here, and then I'm happy to address any questions. So, looking to the future, this is really telling us that the market conditions are favorable. So, this report is really all about, what could happen, based on market, market factors. So the demand is there. There's evidence, right, that the development community is interested in doing projects. And there are substantial community benefits that come with housing. It's a very complicated question when it comes to community coming together and having a vision for future housing. But it's important to consider these types of benefits. So. Right, we work a lot in economic development, and so one of the things that we see a lot working with communities and what we hear from businesses is workforce housing, even before COVID, and now that the situation with the housing market is being much more amplified. But this is a critical issue facing businesses. I mean, we heard from Electric Boat that housing is a high priority issue for them, and they have concerns about being able to house the employees that they want to recruit. Maintaining population, right? We talked about what those projections show. So maintaining and growing population, right, is part of having a healthy and vibrant, sustainable community. But that's not a given. And housing, having the right types of housing is an important part of that equation. Increase the tax base. This can certainly be a complicated one, but we do all types of fiscal impact studies for development projects, and particularly on the apartment side, rental units, as a general rule, provide much more property tax revenue than the increase in community costs that they generate. And then, when you factor in the economic benefits of, the folks that live in these housing, we do tend to see that, it's a positive net increase for communities' tax base and tax revenue. And then lastly, well, not lastly, but the fourth key point I want to hit, there's certainly plenty of community benefits for attracting housing development, but increasing spending at local businesses and attracting businesses, I would say, along with that. There's an old adage in real estate that retail follows rooftops, and it's a numbers game, to attract the types of nice businesses that you may want in the town. it requires having, the population numbers and the income numbers, and, all of these businesses look at certain thresholds. So, as you develop housing, it becomes easier to attract new and quality businesses. So with that, again, this was a very comprehensive study. There's a lot of data and information in that report. So I would encourage anyone who's interested to check that out. As I mentioned, it's on the website, but I'm happy to address any questions if there are.
Thank you so much. I wanted to make a couple comments. Give me 1 second here to get this set. Goodness. There we go. Okay. I'm glad you ended with the slide you ended on, because that was going to be one of my questions, was to have you kind of reiterate the benefits of taking care of some of the suggestions that you made as far as the increased tax base, maintaining the population, supporting our local businesses, and potentially bringing new businesses into the community. But I'm looking on pages 52 and 53, and you have a section called challenges. And I noticed, there's like maybe one or two that really are out of our control. The lack of a developable land, because we have certain parts of town that are very congested already. But there are a couple of things, and I wanted to kind of get your feedback as to what you think that we as a town can do to better facilitate this. And two of the things are the challenge on page 52 talks about a more streamlined process because of this perception that some developers have about the process in Groton being too cumbersome. And then the second thing was on page 53 at the top of the page, the perception again, not that either of these are necessarily true, but if the perception exists, we have to combat that in some way. The perception that the community is not as welcoming as housing development as some other communities. So I was just wondering if Mr. Stevens might be able to speak to both of those and talk to us a little bit about what we can do as a town, as representatives of the town, to try to overcome those misperceptions.
Yeah, that's a great question. This is one of the more difficult things that we see when we do these types of studies. We talk with developers, and I can tell you, no developer's ever told me it's too easy to do a development project in a community. But in terms of the perception issue, I don't think it's a situation where perception matches reality. So I think it's really, I think there's an educational piece to this. I think there's probably kind of a marketing, piece to, really, talk with the developed community, to present the community, as it is, as being more development friendly, perhaps than folks think that it is. So I think it's engaging with the development community, and I know John and his team do a lot of that work. But perceptions are hard to change. That's a very ingrained type of thing. So I think that's one of the most kind of challenging aspects. In terms of the streamlined process, there's always opportunities to kind of look for ways to make the process more efficient. I think in terms of the towns. In terms of the town's process, it's certainly, as I understand it, not the worst process that we've ever seen. So, I don't know that anything concrete, emerged from this study from the developers that we talked with in terms of, being problems. But I think that's more, related to the perception issue, and that not necessarily aligning with reality.
Thank you. So I would also like to see if Mr. Reiner or Mr. Bird or Mr. Bronk would like to talk to us about those same questions, if any of you would like to respond. What can we do?
Sure, this is John. I can jump in, and I don't know if either John or Paige want to add a little bit more, but One of the things that we do hear from developers, and they notice subtle differences in what happens in a town. They watch meetings, especially now with everything being televised and Zoom, and they see if one or two developments in town hit a lot of roadblocks, or if there's a lot of neighborhood opposition. That's something that often scares them. I think historically there are a lot of properties in town that were proposed for development, and then some of them were then purchased as open space. So I think some of that perception is what historical perception of what Dan had mentioned, but there is still I think some things that are happening currently that certainly alert developers, for small subdivisions, for infill. It's often difficult with surrounding communities and neighborhoods, and how that is perceived by the development community is often something that then, perception becomes reality. I think one of the things that is important to mention, one of the other items you had said is, there are a lot of areas in town that are already congested and crowded and developed. Often those are our best opportunities for infill and redevelopment opportunities. It's not certainly going to take over or take up the 5,000 plus housing units that the market is asking for and demanding in the area, but there's always a better way of doing it in ways that we can upgrade infrastructure, whether it's sidewalks, bike paths, and other methods of transportation that may relieve some congestion. But with development comes traffic and comes congestion. So that's something that I think we also need to start thinking outside the box on some of that too.
Thank you.
Paige, I don't know if you had anything to add to that, or John?
I'll comment. Just simply on perception. Basically, a developer or an investor through these redevelopment projects, which often are multifamily housing, they're looking at risk and time. And they don't want to go into an environment where they don't have clarity, where they're going to go from one phase to the next phase to the next phase, and there's a lot of unknown. They would prefer fewer phases, fewer decision points with various boards, commissions, groups, and they would like more certainty. So I experienced that with some of the investors that I speak with. They assume that they're going to be able to work through a process, and then we'll advise them as to what the steps are to go through, and it does catch some, I think, off guard.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate the candid comments on that. Councilor Aubry?
I'm just wondering, it may not have been appropriate, but in the process of doing this review, was there any conversation with any of the local banks as far as their eagerness to be a participant in development in Groton?
I'll take myself off mute here. We didn't interview any local banks as part of our study.
Okay. I think I would just suggest that maybe something that we can do as a town is to try to put together a meeting with the local banks and see how much interest there really is in working with development. There's special monies that banks are supposed to reinvest in their community. And I know that's small money, but I'm sure some of these banks are strong enough to be doing large loans. And John, I don't know if it's anything that we could look to do in the future, but I think that it might be beneficial to this whole concept of moving things forward. If we had a bank that stepped forward and said, look, I'd really like to work with one of these developers, let's create a way for that to happen, it could be really beneficial as people are looking at Groton to do a project. So I think it would be good. I'd be happy to invite them. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's something we certainly can look into and do. I will say, in the developers that we've spoken to, I don't recall lending being a major issue. I think there's a lot of money out there that wants to invest in multifamily housing and in development in general. You know, the trend that we're seeing in Groton, although I think might be a little bit on the higher end or extreme end of things, because we have so much business in town nationally. A lot of the reason why we're seeing so much growth in the housing market is because there's not enough supply to meet the demand that is there. I think here in Groton we're seeing that even more, and that in turn is pricing a lot of people out of the market, especially our kind of the middle housing households. But short answer, yeah, we'd be happy to try to set something up with the local banks and talk to them about that very suggestion. Thank you.
Councilor Melendez?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, just theoretically, if we were able to get the 5,000 units over the next 10 years, I assume that'd probably be somewhere between 10,000, 15,000 new people in town. Maybe this is a question for the manager. We're finishing up our Groton 2020 plan. Do you think our schools can handle a 55,000, you know, we're at 40,000 residents now. Would our schools be able to handle a town of 55,000, do you think? Anyone?
In terms of the numbers we've been looking at all along, even including something like Mystic Ed Center, if you had that number somewhere, we had been in regular contact and communication with the schools during planning with Dr. Grenier, and we continue to be in contact with Superintendent Austin, but it is obviously something we want to keep discussing and look at what kind of development are we looking at, how many kids. You know, a lot of these developments don't have, you know, a lot of younger kids, so it depends on the type of housing that comes in, but obviously communication is going to be key.
All right, just something to think about. Thank you.
I think it's also, this is John again, I think it's also important to acknowledge that one of the points John made is not all this housing is our typical, 3-bedroom home. It's a lot of it is geared towards multifamily and senior housing. Is there a need for single family? Most definitely, but there's a lot of need and demand for the lesser bedroom units and some of the niche type style housing, which is not going to necessarily grow our school-based population. So I think that's an important piece to keep in mind with this. Also, this is what the demand is. It doesn't necessarily demand for this. We will grow to what our zoning allows, what development happens, or if over time, if our zoning changes in certain districts where we want to have additional housing to accommodate the growth that there are pressures to develop in Groton. But again, those are some larger policy issues, and as Dan showed in his presentation, over the past 10 plus years, we've actually been really below or behind the curve in how much housing should have been developed to just even keep demand or keep pace with what the region was asking.
Thank you. Councilor Bordelon.
Thank you. I think it's important to look at everything and every angle. I think streamlining a process concerns folks that some things may be underlooked, and concerns from an environmental aspect are major concerns here. When you look at a population of what we are, about 40,000, and if it was to grow to 55 or 60,000, you may actually make this place unattractable to people who find it attractable now. So I think there's a fine balance. I also, from what I'm reading, is seeing that laborers are in high demand for EB. If you do a search on EB right now, you see those high-paid jobs that you guys highlighted of $100,000, but the ones that I see the most of are the laborer positions that are between $50,000 and $60,000, and those are the folks that sometimes I don't think get captured. So I think when we say we want to not deter developers, I think it's important to look at all of it. I think I said a long time ago at a public comment meeting, not as an elected official of the town council, but I just go back to a friend of mine's son who came to the town, never had been here, and he came from California. And he flew into Providence, stayed in Providence, and he arrived here by rental car. And he's coming for a big interview at EB to make one of those top dollar jobs. He didn't want to live in Groton. The first thing he was presented with when he got off the exit was the city of Groton, Thames Street, which doesn't look welcoming to youth age 20 to 40 years old thinking they want to bring their family here. Now, when he traveled to Mystic, he got to see a different side of Groton on the Groton side. But as an employee coming into the town of Groton, if you see downtown Groton in the city, it's not that welcoming, mixed-use space that youth are looking for. So as we say that we want to attract this population that you guys are capturing, we have to make the community attractable first. So my concern is if we overdevelop and bring all these units in, but we're not bringing in the other side of things, we might be doing it too fast one way or the other. I know for myself, even though I live here in Groton, I go to downtown Westerly a lot. They have a lot of walkable places to eat, social, they have the United Theater, things like that that attract me. And I go there and spend my dollars outside of Groton because I'm not finding that United Theater kind of feel here in the town. So I can respect this report, but also what I'm hearing from another side of the community is affordable mixed-use housing. We need housing in this town. I don't know when the last time low-income or moderate-income housing, some of it has been renovated, but I haven't seen any of that come up brand new in quite some time. And folks in other sectors of town are looking for that too. So I think when we capture this, we need to look at all sectors, all income levels, and we don't want to grow a bunch of apartments and not change the tapestry of the town as well. So I encourage the town to find ways to improve the infrastructure in areas where these folks are coming in for jobs. We need to make it look and present more welcoming when they come in for those new jobs so that they want to stay here. Thank you.
Councilor Baumgartner.
I do want to quickly mention that we are also wrapping up another project, another housing study that is focused specifically on affordable housing. And Dan from Camoin was working with the folks from RKG and Associates, who are the folks that are putting together our affordable housing plan. We'll be bringing that document to the town council sometime in the next month or so to talk specifically about affordable housing. So that is something that we are also looking at and diving into. I think Dan could talk a little bit right now also about how his analysis did look at the demand as it relates to different income brackets and where the market demand is in Groton. Also, in order to start developing some of those mixed-use centers and get that look that we're looking for, it requires investment, and we're trying to get that, but people need to have faith that they can invest in the community and that the product that they're going to build is going to be successful.
Thank you. Councilor Baumgartner?
Thank you. Now, I've heard this number before, and it was mentioned that 82% of folks working in Groton are commuting into Groton as opposed to, living here in Groton and commuting within our own borders. And, I think of that, and I, just looked through the report and did a quick search of the word transit, and I didn't see that word mentioned once. And I think moving forward, we really need to start focusing on transit-oriented development. If we build transit centers, that development is built around those transit centers. It's been mentioned before, and I know the council has expressed significant support and has expressed their support in building a train station here in Groton. And almost sort of people laugh at it, but when they say, oh, we have a downtown Groton, when you actually go down, it has the conditions of, there's no mixed-use development. There aren't people kind of walking the streets and sitting on a bench or recreating. It's folks who are shopping. They're in and out. And at nighttime, it is dead. There isn't any life. There aren't any people. The lights go down. There is no housing. And I think moving forward as a town, we really should focus more on really that area that not only can accommodate the growth, but also has the infrastructure in place to accommodate a mix of ways to actually get into Groton, meaning the train line, the train line that, the Amtrak train line where, we can have conversations with the state, we can explore establishing a train station. So I think, again, moving forward, we should start embracing a transit-oriented development vision. I think it's greener for our, it's a green solution as opposed to a more auto-centric development that we've seen from several development proposals. The one complaint I've had in terms of proposed development is an increase in traffic, and I think we can dispel a lot of that by, embracing, again, the trains, buses, bikes, and I think organically that's starting to kind of permeate within our community. So naturally, we should start, I think, embracing that again. But I appreciate your work. I just hope, again, if we're going to talk about housing, we also got to talk about transit.
Perfect time.
Thank you. I do just, I agree that we need to look at transit and different methods of transit. And that's why, when I started discussing this topic, this is a housing market study for us to understand the demand and the need for housing, which then is going to inform the future decisions that we as a town make as it relates to our POCD, our zoning, and other things. So those are then, all right, how do we accommodate growth? How do we move forward with some of these ideas based upon what the demand is? So again, Dan's role and job in this study wasn't to really say, look at transit modes or anything along those lines. It was purely to understand what the housing market is. But I think those are the next steps, to understand how can we accommodate growth where we want to have growth.
Thank you. Councilor Parker.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is a question for Mr. Stevens. Can you explain the difference in the CCOG and what you're projecting? Because I know you showed it, but projection for CCOG is totally different than what you're projecting for us. But if we're supposed to be having all this incoming growth from not only EB, but potentially the Navy's bringing in more people too, because at the same time. So how do you justify your report compared to what CCOG is anticipating?
Are we talking JLUS, the JLUS study?
Well, didn't he just show CCOG on? It was a difference. He showed CCOG.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I take myself off mute again. Yeah, so we're talking a little bit about the difference between projections and forecasts. So, the projections that we're talking about with the town of Groton, and even the region, that's looking at things like births and deaths and in-migration and out-migration. And, based on those things, the outlook, is a little bit more negative. And that's what those declines, the declines that we were showing. When we look at CCOG and some of their forecasts, they're kind of layering in some judgment calls about what's going to happen in the future, based on that economic growth. And so, the point that I was trying to make with, those two charts in the beginning was that, the projections, are negative, but on the other hand, there is this kind of more positive outlook potential at the regional level. But for the town to really kind of tap into that, more optimistic scenario, it's going to have the right type of housing. It's going to need to have, more housing and the right types to be able to accommodate that growth. Otherwise, as we were showing before, with the underproduction of housing development happening in other communities, that development's and that demand's going to be met in other communities.
My second question is, when you were doing this report, did you think about how families were affected with COVID? Because families probably left their homes to move in with other family members to balance everything out. So we would have open homes, but we're not bringing the people in. Is that how we're saying that? Because with COVID, when you did this report, were you looking at this report before March 2020, or is this starting from March 2020 to now?
So this has been over the past 6 months. So we've been working on this through kind of the COVID times here.
All right, so the numbers would still be off because we have families who moved in with each other or left their homes. So there may be available housing for other new people to come in, but we're just not bringing them in because we're not marketing it correctly. Is that, I don't know how to get that across, so.
I was having a little trouble understanding what the question may be. I don't know if someone could repeat it for me, please. I apologize.
So you're saying that you did this report, the 6 month during COVID. Would that not show a difference? Did you compare it to 2020 to now, basically? And you have families who had to leave their homes in order to pay rent and stuff like that, and combined families. So there's homes open, but families are struggling. So you probably had top earners who probably lost their job. So how are we justifying the job market with what you're projecting? Is that part of the projection of going to decrease?
I think it's a little bit yes and no. So we, as we've been working on this, we haven't had, kind of those updated figures. So, it's possible that some of those housing units, have become available. I think overall what we're finding with COVID is that's just exacerbated the housing situation. So we've seen, inventory at record lows, and it's really amplified the need for additional housing. There's all kinds of other factors playing into that with, people being more mobile now, and kind of shifts in populations with remote working and so on. I probably doesn't fully answer your question, but, and I Paige, I see your hand up if you want to add something to that, but, right, so we haven't had the current data on the COVID trends, but, we've tried to account for that as best as possible in the study.
I just wanted to add that I think we're trying to show a story, and although the numbers might be a little bit higher, might be a little bit lower in certain scenarios, the end conclusion is basically the same. It wasn't mentioned tonight, but in terms of availability, I believe, Dan, you had stated that Groton has roughly 3% of its total housing stock as vacant, which is extremely low. So there isn't a whole lot of opportunity for those who are looking for housing to easily find available supply, and that seems to match some of the stories we're hearing, the anecdotal information of an apartment that comes up for rent, and I've heard from some people it could be upwards of about 100 people that are calling, looking for an apartment, almost begging, please don't lease the apartment. I need to get an apartment, a good one, that we're moving to Groton for job-related matters. So maybe the numbers slightly altered as a result of some COVID impact, but at the end of the day, the trend still is the same. We have high demand and low supply across all levels, all types, and I believe most income levels.
You have time remaining, Councilor Parker? You're good. Councilor Franco?
Thank you for bringing this presentation to us. I think people in our community have been asking for an update on the housing situation, and just from what I've been watching, I think there is an extremely high demand for housing in Groton. One only has to look on the Groton Forum to see people who are constantly searching for apartments and having a hard time finding them. So my question relates to where we have some apartments going in on the school properties that we have, which we sent out for RFPs, but are we having any kind of demand from developers coming into Groton saying, hey, we want to build housing? And are things working? Are they looking at property beyond the school properties that we are doing? Like, is there, like, are they coming into Groton saying, hey, you guys need housing and we're here to build it? Find us some land. Are you hearing anything? Is there anything in the pipeline other than the school properties?
This is John. Yes, we are having developers come in, talking to us about private properties that are not necessarily just our pieces that we're marketing. One of the difficult pieces or parts of this equation is land in Groton is difficult to develop. We have a significant amount of open space in town, and a lot of our easily developable pieces are either already developed, are protected as open space, or people want a lot of money for them, or might not be willing to sell some of the pieces. A lot of the properties that we think about for redevelopment in our downtown, a lot of those properties are not for sale, and we can't force people to sell them. But the short answer is we do have a significant amount of development interest. We have a hard time matching people up with good available properties to develop.
So what are the steps the council can take on this if it's privately owned beyond the school properties or, the tax properties that we've acquired? Like, what are we supposed to do with this report, and how do we go forward then?
I think one of the things we can do with this report is, after tonight, we want to take this information to our Planning and Zoning Commission, as well as our Economic Development Commission. And we encourage members of the public to read this, to understand this. For anyone that's looking for a home or an apartment, they get it, of what the shortage is right now. And then we need to think about our long-term land use policies in areas where we want to see more development or infill or other strategies that we could utilize to start having development where it's appropriate, where there's available infrastructure, and having these larger community conversations about growth and development. Because very few people want more development near where they are. Change is difficult, change is hard, and that's something that we can keep things the status quo, keep things where they are, and continue to watch the population decline over time, or we can, as a community, look at where can we accommodate additional growth beyond what is there now, and especially on sites that are very difficult to develop. Those are the areas where more incentive through better, streamlined processes, higher densities, better infrastructure. Those are pieces that can fall into that equation. And also, there might be certain numbers that people want to see where, we don't want to change this area, or we don't want to change that area. And those are all part of that equation.
All right, I see it as a very difficult path forward after the school properties are taken care of. As you both have told us, this is our best chance to have any type of development in our community. I just don't know how we're going to get this housing here unless the developer comes and potentially buys up property that's already developed and redevelop it, because there is so much that's already developed. And as you said, it's private property and it's privately owned, and there's not much we can do other than give incentives to have change, as many have said in the downtown Groton area, such as the plazas down there. And I'm just going to say, like the Benny's Plaza, many people are calling for, they would like to see some change in that area. But it's, as a community, as a town council, it's hard to make the change happen. You can give incentives, but it's up to the property owners to take advantage of them. And I think that the community has done that. I mean, the government has done that and given many incentives, and it's up to these landowners now to take advantage of them. And I just see, as a council, it sort of looks to me as a hard path forward. And I would like to see more senior housing as well. They built that beautiful facility over in Stonington, and I would like to see something like that in Groton as well, because there are people that are just, aging, and they are tired of the maintenance, and they do want to change the lifestyle, and it would open up for the younger people to have their home. Thank you. My time is up.
And we're going back to second time hands. Councilor Bordelon.
Thank you. I think it's kind of, there was talk about how do we make it more streamlined and more the process. I think with a stronger RFP and development agreement and more community outreach in our community early on, as we have properties that have been sitting for quite some time, bringing folks in those neighborhoods around the table at an earlier than the developer is here and now this is what they're looking to do, will help ensure that the community input and that pushback is not there. So engagement early and now, right? This is what's happening. These are the areas that we're looking at. I also do think senior housing is a concern. I also think it's important to look at mixed income housing. It's something we really don't have in this town, and something that where folks could live where they only make $20,000 and then the highest person could be making $100,000. I think that's so important moving forward. I think clusters of low-income housing is not the way to go anymore. Knowing folks that have lived there and friends and living in this community, it is tough to have to admit that you have to live in that area, and people know by living there that you must make this much money. I think the way that Groton moves forward is taking this survey and looking at ways to do mixed income housing where you have low income, middle income, and high income all living together for the greater good of Groton, and it allows for a more open, transparent living space where folks have quality of life and dignity because they feel like they're like their counterparts. And that's the type of development that I'd like to see captured. You can also do that with senior housing. You can do that with mixed-use income senior housing as well. That's something Groton doesn't have. Our low-income housing is on one side of the town and not on the other. We want to put all these high ends on one end, and no one wants to put them on other sides. So I think it's really important to look at the whole need. I think Councilor Baumgartner brought up a great point about transportation and accessibility. We don't even have a bus that goes into downtown Mystic currently. That's another issue. When you look at Westerly and neighboring towns, they have transit all the way from Westerly grow the town, but I'd like to see the surveys that state what can we feasibly handle in our town. So it's one thing to say these are a ton of people needing housing, but what can our town support without losing the demographics and the tapestry that we created that makes us unique? So I would love to update infrastructure, but I think it's important to see what can we handle. Even now on Exit 89, I was out there the other day, 2 accidents within less than an 8-hour period. The traffic's increasing, Route 1. Here, it's great, that's what we want, but we're also hearing the pushback when we grow too fast and not responsible. So a lot of the RFPs and development agreements that we're signing are all apartments so far. I haven't really seen in this town any other development really come in. So I think it's a lot of different moving parts that we really have to connect together. And I think we need to open up that discussion for our town and really see, does our town really want a population of 70,000 or 80,000 people in Groton? I mean, those are the questions that you don't meet the pushback. That's and looking at old infrastructure in our town before building new. Thank you.
I would just want to close by saying I think the council has done a good job with moving our excess properties forward. Kudos to the town staff for helping us get the old school properties. They have not been sitting for a long time. We have done a remarkable job in trying to get them back onto the market. So thank you, Mr. Stevens, and thank you, Mr. Reiner and Mr. Bronk. Mr. Burton, unless you have anything else, I think we're going to take a 5-minute break before we move on. Okay, thank you, Mr. Stevens. We'll be back in 5 minutes. It's currently 8:25, so 8:30, please.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good night. Did you want to speak before we move on to the next item? Okay, we'll take that as a no.
I know that.
Okay, thank you. So we are on to item 2021-694, Town-Owned Property Reuse Evaluation Process. There are 3 options after Mr. Burt presents. The options are approve the policy as presented, approve the policy with changes, or do nothing. And Mr. Burt provided a sheet for everybody at their place settings, and he will be sharing the same document on screen, so those of you watching at home can also follow along with us. So, Mr. Burt, thank you.
I'm going to add on to that you'll notice there's no motion in there. I really don't anticipate any action tonight.
Okay.
This is going to be a process, I'm sure.
Okay, so you're
and
not
I'm already
requiring
spotting
any
things. I'm
action?
changing. I'm already. We worked for several months, and I'm already starting to make my own changes on here. So we'll go through an initial run of this.
Okay.
And some of these things, now, first of all, you see on the screen, if it's in white, it's already our current policy that we have. You want to zoom in?
Yeah, zoom in, please.
Maybe
I think it's
top
going to be
half of
hard
the
for
page.
people to see. Yeah. Keep going, that's better. I think that's better for people watching at home. Thank you.
Yeah. So the white is existing policy. The red text, yellow highlighted, is additions, at least as a starting position for an update. Now, some of these things we do, they're just not reflective in the current policy, so we're just putting them in there. On some of it, my glasses keep fogging, sorry. I'm trouble seeing. You'll see right away the purpose. We added in, right now the law for a lot of these procedures are exempted if it's a tax foreclosure process where the land's being taken, because we often sell it in a different format. It's not usually for, developments, often houses or others. So unless it was decided we were going to do development, those would be exempted, which they already are from much of the process with the, it's a caveat in the law for some of the process. Goals, this council are the ones that came up with those 5 goals. At this point, I don't have any changes to that. My suggestion is, just so we're not here all night, that I kind of just go through it tonight, and then maybe I collect comments and bring them back to the next one.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yep, that would be fine. Thank you.
I just have a point of clarification, just to make sure I'm understanding, if that's okay.
Your clarification is what?
I have a point of clarification.
Yes,
about
what is your point of clarification?
Yes. We're going to do a first read is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, basically it's the first read.
And then we can email you any other thoughts to it?
Yep.
Okay.
And we'll come back, compile, come back. Like I said, I think this will be a bit of a process.
Okay. Thank you.
This is just the first rough of what, and the planning department was involved with drafting this, as well as finance and myself. Process, just making it clear. Now, we currently have the internal committee where all departments meet and discuss properties. Putting in there that all such meetings shall be open to the public. Of course, as you do certain things that are executive session, you can still go into executive session, just to make that clear. It's, they're public meetings just like we have a public meeting here. Same rules apply. And we'll have minutes and all that type of thing. No changes on number 2. Some of the questions that we're seeking input on. Again, let me know if you have any additions or changes. Number 3, we already do this, of course. Consult with the town attorney concerning looking at the title, looking for any constraints or possible legal reasons the property cannot be sold. We do that already, but just making it clear, for anyone in the future, they know that is the process. We certainly don't want to run into an issue with title. The committee then looks at, do we overall think it should be sold? Is there internal uses? Maybe Parks and Rec has a use for a facility, whatever else. Or, TVCCA, we think, that Gloucester would be great for that. So whatever the recommendation is, that's presented to the town council. My glasses are really fogging. I'm sorry, just up here. I'm at a distance. Do you mind if I pull it down? My glasses are fogging up crazy. I can hardly read.
I don't think you're going to contaminate anybody.
People comfortable with that?
Yes, I'm fine.
Okay. Sorry about that. Glasses are clearing up. So number 4, the committee would submit a recommendation just on general, should it be sold, is there a recommendation to sell, to keep it, and why? Of course, we're soliciting input from different, Conservation Commission, Planning Commission, that type of thing is part of that process in decision making. If you're wanting, and then also if you're looking at selling, if the council seems to be inclined towards selling, it would be sent to the Planning and Zoning Commission 8/24 just for their recommendation for sale or disposition of properties. That's their official way of looking at it. Number 6, brand new. Town council will hold a public hearing to gather citizen input on, now usually whenever you sell property, you have to have if it's worth $10,000 or more, you have to have a public hearing. I'm looking at doing something additional earlier on before we get into all that process. Town council will hold a public hearing to gather citizen input on the potential sale prior to acting on staff recommendations. So we would present, you would ask questions, et cetera, and then we would schedule, a hearing to get solicit input on those ideas on selling, et cetera. Let's see, notice of the hearing will be forwarded to the RTM and all towns, boards, and commissions for further input on where we're at. Number 7 is going to have to be moved because in August, the RTM, and let me tell you what that one is first. Following public hearing and receiving comments from PZC. Now, typically, before you do an RFP, the typical process is you would want to know you can sell the property. You'd want permission because the developer doesn't want to spend a lot of time and money. However, the RTM has adopted a rule that before they will vote on a property sale, they want to see the appraised value, the preferred and allowed uses, meaning zoning, just essentially zoning information, but also the probable sales price, which means going through the at least through the initial RFP process prior to taking it to the RTM. That's a rule they updated recently. So that will have to drop down to somewhere like right after number 10, somewhere in that area. If the town council decides they want to proceed with a property sale or lease, town staff will create a draft RFP for sale of the property utilizing any direction received from the town council, and then we'll bring the copy back to the council prior to release for any changes and for input. RFP will also be shared with the Planning and Zoning Commission for comment prior to its release so they can give any input on what they're seeing there. RFP will include language to inform respondents of the requirement for a full criminal background check and credit check to be completed for the primary personnel of the development company prior to execution of any formal agreements. Existence of a criminal prosecution shall not automatically disqualify the responder, but will be considered by the town council prior to approval of any agreements. The RFP will also contain the scoring criteria for the review process, which it already does. I'm just putting that in there that it's a requirement. We always have included it. Criminal background check. There's not much being done by other towns, but obviously we've been in a different circumstance. I talked to a couple of their outside attorneys besides our attorneys too, and they said, usually it would be right at that. You put in some sort of notice they would sign at the RFP as to if they have any, and then before you do your process, but then you would look at the criminal background at that point before you pick a preferred developer. Submitted proposals shall be reviewed by a property sale review committee, which is essentially what we had where there'd be relevant staff, 2 representatives of the town council, 2 representatives of the RTM, and a representative of the Economic Development Commission with such members. Right now, it being appointed by the mayor, but however the council wants to do it. All such meetings shall be open to the public, just as these meetings are, as we said for those earlier committee meetings. I would also say the review process will include an extensive internet search of the responding companies and its principles for companies that are invited to continue the process beyond the first interview. The The recommendation of that property sale review committee will be forwarded by staff to the town council for consideration of naming a preferred developer and going over what all the bids that were received, all the proposals that were received. This is probably the point where we would, before we officially name a preferred developer for the town council, that's probably where we would send it to the RTM then. We would have a pretty good idea of what the sale price would likely be, or at least in the ballpark, and we would have enough information to actually get the RTM to approve the sales. So that's the point before you would officially name a preferred developer. It goes to the RTM for sale with permission. Then we have the town council decide if they are comfortable with the preferred developer. Is there a question?
Yeah, say that again. So if we're doing a process, it comes to the town council, then it's going to go to the RTM to say nay or yay, and then come back to us?
Well, part of the legal requirements and part of the charter requirements is that both the town council has to first approve a property sale, not a developer per se, but an actual, we're going to sell the piece of property. You can't sell it without that. Then it goes to the RTM. Typically, you would do that process early on. However, the RTM now has a rule that you have to present information, including the likely sale price to them. So that necessitates this part dropping down in the process.
So they overrode something that was in the charter?
They added their own rule on top of it, and the attorneys did look at it, and it's their own rules that they are not going to take it up until they have that information.
Wait a minute, one more question. I'm so sorry.
No.
Will that be included when we're doing our step process, or is it only going to go to the RTM? Should that be included in?
You would have it before they would. When all that information, the bids and preferred developer information is presented to the council, you would have that first. Under number 9, or 10, I mean. So when it's all presented under number 10, once you get the information and are interested, if you're interested in continuing on, we would get official permission to sell from the RTM, and then negotiate any agreements with the preferred developer, thereby basically creating a preferred developer officially. Once all that's done, we basically we're ready for sale. And I also just added something in there. Nothing in the policy will prevent the town council from utilizing alternative sales methods, such as by auction, or if you were going to trade properties or whatever else. I just want to make sure that it's understood that the council can choose to do another format if something unusual came up. And that is where I'm at right now.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Burt?
Oh, sorry.
Rules for everybody, remember?
I just forgot.
Okay.
Oh, you see.
Hold on. 2021, 694. I just got to keep track of everything. Counselor Parker.
Okay. Oh, I know that the part about the criminal background check and the credit check, is that going to be done internally, or are we going to hire an outside agency to do that part?
Well, we have an agency, outside agency we use now.
So they would do a full background and a TransUnion,
Right.
some similar
Correct.
credit report?
Right.
Okay, can we write that in there?
I assume everybody would be agreeable to that.
It doesn't have to say the name, just say that the town already has a
Right.
preferred person doing it. And I'm still,
So basically by an outside company.
yes. And I'm still wondering about the RTM process, but that's an offline topic. Thank you.
I would concur with Counselor Parker regarding compliance with the charter. And I would ask that we could see something from the attorney indicating that the process is not overriding the charter.
Okay.
And making sure that we are all, the different bodies within the town are acting appropriately as per the town charter.
And one thing I neglected, should we ask Mr. Reiner or Mr. Brock if they have anything to add on to what I presented before
Sure.
we take further questions?
Sure. Mr. Reiner, Mr. Bronk, I'm not sure if you heard Mr. Burt. Did you want to add anything in before we have further discussion, sir?
Yes, we both heard John's presentation. The only thing that I do want to bring up, I know we've talked about this before, is as much certainty as we can create in the process going into things as we do this, the better off we are. So, being consistent as we move forward and letting developers know what our game plan is moving forward, so we're not moving things mid-process. I think that's very important.
Right. And this process, once adopted, could be included right in the RFP to make sure they know what we do.
I would just add to that, it just comes down to certainty. By the time we bring in investors, as a reminder to people, we don't simply issue an RFP and then attract investors. We attract investors all along, and they're looking at Groton, they're looking for opportunities. Sometimes they're looking at one project and for whatever reason they don't pursue it, and they end up stumbling onto another project. So we have a lot of conversations over a number of months, sometimes years. And if Groton as a whole can define the certainty, whatever they want, I think we need to make sure we get to that point before we issue an RFP, so that we're not modifying things after the fact that adds confusion, and it would not serve Groton well in trying to get over the finish line in getting a development actually wrapped up.
Thank you. I'm just going to continue. So is it possible, do you have something from our attorney already indicating that that the rule change that was done by the RTM is appropriate and does fit with the charter? I think that's what Councilor Parker's concern was as well.
I believe I do, but let me double check that they had the final language. Let me just double check that.
I would like to see that, and I think it would be beneficial for the rest of the council to see that as well.
Sure.
We value the work that the RTM does, we value the work that the council does, and we want to make sure we are complying with the charter. We fought hard for that charter, to keep that charter, and we want to make sure we're in compliance with it. So I would just urge caution, and I concur with Councilor Parker as far as the concerns that she expressed. Councilor Melendez.
I'll let you know either way tomorrow.
Thank you. Councilor Melendez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In number 9, 2 representatives of the RTM. Perhaps the representatives could be of the same district where the land is located. And that's just a suggestion. I don't know if other people would be in favor of that.
Can you email? What I'll do is compile those, and that maybe then the council can kind of go through and give their yay or nay to different ideas.
Okay. Do you have more, Councilor Melendez? No, that's it. Councilor Bordelon?
Thank you. I think it's important, from what I'm learning and what has transpired over in the past, I guess, is that giving the council the top 3 preferred developers, I think, would be much more important. And important for us to see those 3 in their entirety, since we, as a 9-member body, at the end have to, I think bringing, the way it's been is the preferred developer would come before the council. And only having 2 councilors represent that doesn't really represent necessarily the need or will of the 9. And some of that's stuff that can't be discussed because it's, got legal things. And so I think it's really important that the 9 of us are brought in at an earlier phase. If our name is going to be stamped to it and we're going to not have to push back later, and you want a smooth process, I think that we should be brought in once 3 developers are presented and you have 3 preferred developers, so that we can kind of ask some questions earlier on in the process. I also think there should be district representation that's present, however that may be. It could be a combination of councilors or RTM members, but I think it's really important to make sure that all sides of town are talking and no one side is left out, depending on any given time. So I think that should be established early on, because as development is ever evolving, you want to have that base already identified. But I do not think that it is appropriate to continue with just 2 councilors on this committee. And I think that we need to see it, like as I stated, with the 3.
Just to say, we do need some sort of process where staff are asking all the technical, so we're going to need this part of it as a part of it also, and then their top 3 would, if the council so wished, will come to but we do need, because some of these things, we've seen things that just aren't legal to do and other things, and they do need to go through that process.
So just a point to understand what you're saying, so it could not be that the 3 prefer to come before the 9-month?
No, it could, but
Okay.
I'm just saying, we're going to need a separate committee from the council as a whole. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would be an actually a great committee to have, and I think it would be important. I think, just having the district representation, I think the RFP also needs to have some clause in there as to what our rights are as counselors in these development agreements. There's attorneys' opinions, but I think as we proceed forward, I think there should be something written in there maybe to talk with attorneys about, what influence does a counselor have, and at what points in the process, if things start to change, that, we can advocate, at the end of the day. Because if something goes in a direction one way and it phases over, like what happened with the last development, and this was exposed that there was all this, criminal background, any counselor at any point, despite an attorney's opinion, should have the right to pull their name from that because the integrity of that had been broken. So when that is broken from a counselor's perspective, what are our rights to withdraw our name? So that's some of the stuff I'd like to see. And I will type most of it up, but I'm just kind of speaking.
Sure.
But I think district representation is really important.
Councillor Heed, I see your hand, sir. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So could I just ask you to restate, maybe I didn't quite understand it, who would sit on this town-owned property evaluation committee?
I wasn't remembering right. Basically, the way it's been made up, relevant staff, 2 representatives from the town council, 2 representatives from the RTM, potentially in the district if the council so chooses, a EDC, an Economic Development Commission member, and this is just a starting point. Whatever if the council has other ideas, this is entirely up to the council.
All right, thank you.
And Paige, I think Paige wanted to add something on.
Yes, Mr. Bronk?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to definitely support the evolution of the process. I think every community does it differently, and they never do it the same way twice. It's always evolving. But I think it's also important to go back a few years before economic development and property development became a priority. Some of these properties sat there for over a decade, and there was no process. So I think it's important to realize it's natural for this to grow, we learn and move forward. But there was no representation by the council in past years. And the administration has suggested it would be a good idea to have some council representation. And if there are more councilors that council members that are interested in participating, I personally think that's a great idea. But it is a pretty long process, and there are several meetings that are involved, lots of interviews. So I definitely think there are a lot of details. There's a lot of back and forth, and the closer the process can get to the council, I think will make it a stronger process. That's not something we had before, and having the 2 council members, we thought it was a significant improvement to what we had before. If we want to have more council representatives in the committee, I think that's fine.
Yeah, one thing to mention when you do, I'm going to send out a version of this with that number 7 item moved down for the RTM approval of sale. Make sure when you do some of your comments so that you only send it directly to me, not to the group, so that we don't run afoul of FOIA.
Thank you. Councilor Overy, did you? Yes, you have the floor.
Yeah, looking at this, I almost think this should be two processes. What ultimately you're doing, as I'm reading this, and I could be incorrect, is you're looking at the property at what the property could be used for, what planning and zoning feels it could be used for, what the community feels it could be used for. Everything you're doing at that point is the land. It has nothing to do with the developer that might buy it. What we'll be able to say to a developer when it comes time for the proposals is this was what the land could be used for, this is what the neighbors think would be a good use, yada, yada, yada. Then you go on with the other part of it. But I think we're looking at a piece of land. We're not looking at who's going to be on the committee to review it at this point. We're looking at a process for the land. Then step 2 would bring in who's going to sit on the committee that would review proposals that come in and go through the process with that. At that time, you would do your background checks, you would do your, there's a lot of other things that are actually asked in the process. They have to show that they actually have the financial ability to do what they're suggesting they can do. There's a whole series of things that they have to do. So I personally think we're mixing things here a little bit, and I think it would be better to have 2 processes, number 1, number 2. That's just my thought. I think this way it's a little confusing.
That's entirely, the reason it's right now is, one is because the council chose last time to include it as
And
one.
I appreciate this is just the beginning. I'm just trying to, I just want everybody to understand what we're really talking about now is the process for the land. You know, if we have a piece of land and we determine it can be sold, might as well have planning and zoning at that point looking at it and saying, okay, what would they, under their rules, what could be here? Because then it might have to be that we have to do something with the zoning board of appeals. You know, we're getting the land ready. Then we find our developers. We create how we feel the committee should be that's reviewing the proposals, all the entities that go with that. And then when that committee has arrived at what they think would be a good selection, then you bring that to the council, and then from the council to the RTM. But that's just, you know, I know more has to go into it, but I think that would make it so it would flow a little better and be understood a little easier.
One thing I'll do, and you know, that'll be something the council can decide later, but one thing I'll do is I'll add basically headers to each piece. I'll basically kind of break it up in the same policy into 2 sections, so that's a little clearer, and then that'll also kind of tell you what it would look like if it was 2 separate policies.
Okay. I don't want to add
Is that okay? I mean,
a whole lot to your work, but
Oh, that's
I
easy.
think it's
No.
getting confusing because we're talking about 2 different steps here.
right. So the version I sent out will have that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing multiple hands. So we'll go Councilor Baumgartner, Councilor Franco, and then I don't know if Councilor Heed's hand is up for a second time or not. So we'll check back with you, Councilor Heed, in a moment. Councilor Baumgartner, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I understand this is the town-owned property reuse evaluation process. So does this guide decision-making for strictly town-owned property?
Yes.
Or properties under our purview? So, for example, Mr. Gorel's school, state-owned property. How would this evaluation process jibe with the reality that that property is currently owned by the state of Connecticut?
That would almost have to be its own category, just because we don't own it and the state had to agree to a process. So it's very much state-driven. So that almost has to be an agreement with the state each time something would come up as to, I think you'd see what they're thinking, and then we try to negotiate with them using what our processes are to see if we can come up to a satisfactory mutually, you know, because anything we do with them would be in writing for what we're going to do for a process.
So any evaluation process the council undertakes for the Mystic Education Center would be separate from this evaluation process?
Can I give that a little thought in exactly what's the best way to handle it? I haven't really thought about that not being town-owned land. Because anything we do has to be, you know, signed off and include the, obviously this isn't, you know, any committees would hold the state and other things. So right now we have a process that's basically agreed to with the state. That's what holds right now. However, we're lead on RFP, so you'd probably follow our RFP part. So let me give that a little thought. It's a great question.
Okay. The other item, the existence of a criminal prosecution, I do feel strongly that that should automatically disqualify a responder to an RFP. I think everyone's had really excellent suggestions, but really that initial question and then that second item. And also, too, I think it should be explicitly expressed within this whether or not a developer is seeking any form of government assistance through TIF or in kind of, and I don't know kind of how that jibes with this evaluation process, but maybe including that or being cognizant of that before we get too deep, and then kind of at the 11th hour, perhaps a developer will be saying, hey, we need X amount of TIF dollars, and it's completely out of line with what the town has the capacity of supporting or whatnot. So those three things.
And they do have, RFP requires that. You have to put in the response what you're looking for. So that is required. That's part of the financials and the proposal that's looked at.
Awesome. Thank you.
Councilor Franco.
So process step 1 going into step 2. I have, so basically what you're saying is department staff, town of Groton agencies, board and commissions, and entities will consider the following questions in evaluating the property. So the town council does not really choose which direction the property should go in. These staff and agencies and commissions will give a recommendation to the council, and that's when we will decide which way to go in.
Right, we're basically collecting the information on it at that stage. What are the holdups? What are the, whatever else, we're throwing a net out there and trying to gather everything. And then staff, as always, as we do most times, we give a recommendation to the council, and then you have all the information, then you do with it as you will, as you would any other agenda item.
Because at times we do then receive separate, we have received separate recommendations from just maybe the Conservation Committee. They'll send theirs separately from this process. So, and then that has to be weighed separately then, because you've taken their information and put it into your consensus and made a recommendation, and then they send a separate recommendation. So now that's,
well,
do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that would likely come at a later stage. They would weigh in it earlier on, and you would incorporate that. But then, let's say you actually go through the RFP process and certain proposals come out. Well, you're going to regather information, and of course, their opinion may change, and they're free to submit that, and that's part of what the council would review.
Okay, on section 5, can you explain what the state statute regarding 8-24 is?
It's essentially whether they concur with recommending to sell the property.
So it's just simply sell? That's it?
Yes, that's all. Right. And if they say no, if the council were to decide they wanted to sell, you would have to override their opinion by, I believe it's a 2/3 vote.
Okay. That was because I was just curious. I've also heard where the zoning should come in the early stages, where they could possibly do a text change and things of that nature. Is there a possibility in the early stages when we're saying this is property we'd like to sell, and what does Planning and Zoning Commission, what is their farthest stretch that they even think? So, and I know it's not perfect, but just to have the early discussion, because otherwise some people might get into a position where they're purchasing it and they think they have to go through a text change, and issues may arise in the future, and if they knew some things maybe in the beginning.
Right.
And I know it's not perfect, and like I've talked to people, and I said you can't figure out what's exactly going on to a property until you get back the results from RFPs and you find out what the demand is and what developers are wanting to develop. I mean, and this one location, but it wouldn't be zoned for a vineyard unless, you know what I'm saying? So those weren't something that was even in somebody's mind of what it would be for. You know, maybe they didn't think agriculture. I get that. So my question is there a possible way to bring planning and zoning in the very beginning and see how far they would stretch to what would go on that property?
Well, that's why they're included as looking at, as part of the RFP process before it's ever released, is seeing what the council's thinking about, so you can at least, have your input, and then they can review that and see if there's any major issues. There may be going back and forth between the PZC and the council with that RFP.
You're saying in section, what section is that?
That's in, let's see,
Are you at 5?
Let's see, number 8, when you're first drafting the RFP, it says under the RFP will be shared with the Planning and Zoning Commission for comment prior to its release. Then we'll make changes, and if there's anything significant, then we bring it back to the council and say, hey, they're not going to allow this.
But I was also told when the RFP goes out, it's basically just a request for proposal for this property, and it doesn't actually give direction of what exactly we're looking for. So, because we never know
it's
what.
also trying to do to head off and do what it's trying to find that balance of, hey, if there's something that you're seeing in here that, we're not usually, but they might see something in there and they might say, hey, we want to make it clear we're never going to allow this. It's their chance to make whatever comments or things they want to us that guides things.
Okay, I understand.
They might see a piece that's in a certain part of town and say, just we're never going to allow, beyond this in that area of town,
Okay, understood.
Yeah.
That clarifies some things. I understand that there's interest in the internet search, but there's a lot on the internet that's also not true. So I think that's a sort of legal issue. Like even in HR, there's issues about searching for people on the internet and finding information about them when you're even hiring somebody. So
as we go through this process, one thing I'd recommend is as we start narrowing down into what the council wants, we will run it by the attorneys to review.
Right, I agree with that.
Just don't want to do it too early because we know there's been lots of changes.
Well, thanks for answering my questions, and I will also put some items in writing, some other items that I've seen in there. Thank you.
I think that's great, and I just have to say that I'm, despite bumps in the road, I think this council's doing the right thing by not just simply sticking a for sale sign on an empty piece of property and selling it to the highest bidder. The fact that we even have an RFP proposal and the fact that this council is doing lessons learned. We're acknowledging that things could be improved, and we're working on making those changes. So thank you, council, and thank you for town staff. And we will get those suggestions to Mr. Burt. Only Mr. Burt. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. Councilor Bordelon.
Thank you. I guess it also would be important I think it almost would be important to almost have another, with some of these thoughts when it comes to state property that is not ours, like the state property, but also like brownfield properties where we were using brownfield money, right? Isn't that what we were using with the Mystic Oral School property when we were doing our advertising?
Yes.
I guess it also should be clear as to how much of our town taxes and money that we are going to use to promote a property that we don't own. So where is that medium? Where, as a town, as a council, do we draw the line? Where do we agree that this property, I know we got, $50,000 from the state for brownfield money. I'm sure we exceeded that amount. Did we, John? Or
Yeah, not by a lot, but
right. And I would love to have some numbers on that, actually, to understand, to see, because it would be interesting to know how much we put out, and as a council to the taxpayers in the town for a property that's not ours. How much money do we draw? Where do we draw the line? Like, where's our guideline with that?
Well, and that's part of what, as you take on and negotiate with, let's say it's the state owning it, you're going to negotiate some of that.
Right, but I think
it's hard to do that in a policy up front, considering we don't know what all that can
Right,
include.
so maybe it would be worded as such to state that the council would be brought in at an early phase to talk about the amounts in which one would want to put forward for our advertising for land that we do not own, and in an agreement where we did not have a planning and zoning agreement done yet, that we're not putting ourselves kind of hanging out there too much. So I think that that's something else that we should really consider and kind of, kind of come back to the table more frequently on.
Yeah, and I don't think, like I said, I don't think much town resources outside of staff time were involved, but I think Mr. Ryan's already pulled that not long ago, so he can pull that up.
Yeah, I just think that that's important, and brownfield money versus, land, like I think there's a lot of moving parts. I can understand what Councilor Obrey is stating and what Councilor Franco had stated, making sure that, we kind of, it's like this property had been on vacant for a long time, so we should already been talking about what possibly could go there many years ago and what our zoning commission thought could or couldn't go there before we went so far down the line. And that's what I would like to see not happen again, is a way that we know and have a plan in place, and that would protect the town on a greater scale.
I'll give that some thought, and if you have any thoughts, please share.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. Thank you.
Councilor Parker?
I'm just going to state, aren't we supposed to be talking about the town-owned property? I understand about the other thing, but we're only talking about town-owned property?
At this point, I'm going to give some thought and talk with staff about Councilor Baumgartner's question, because it's a very good question.
Very good question.
And I'll get back, but right now, yeah, it's about...
It could be emailed, but we
yeah.
got to stick to what our agenda item is, right? Because we don't want to veer off too far and get in trouble.
Thank you. All right, so thank you very much on that, and I think I don't see any other hands there, so we'll go to item 2021-704, Cannabis Municipal Authority.
This is the one the council had said you were pushing off to the 26th, and I was told to hold off on having the attorney come because the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing was tonight.
Right.
And they did get word that they did approve the text amendment tonight prohibiting cannabis establishments, but they made it clear that this is temporary and they want to start work right away on the regulations. But this is going to be on the agenda for the 26th.
Thank you. I just wanted to note that this is a referral I made. Councilors Melendez, Franco, Parker, and Heed all were in favor of bringing this for discussion. And given what planning and zoning is doing, then I would like us to focus on the first part of the referral, which was to consider the ban on the smoking or vaping on public property is where I would like to focus when we come back on the 26th. That's on page 79. It's section 84, which went into effect on October 1st, and it details exactly what we can do. And I hope councilors will look that over and be ready to take that up on the 26th. Thank you. And that takes us to 5E, which is 2021-396-3, Riverview Avenue update. This was on page 91 in your packet. Mr. Burt also provided this packet, and is this going to be brought up on screen as well, Mr. Burt? Thank you. And we'll let you take it over and give an overview to the public, please. That's might not be sure what's going on.
And this is another one, you'll see no motion is prepared in advance on this, and I'm not recommending a motion tonight. It's really just an update, and then I'm going to recommend that we solicit more public input before deciding next steps. Can you go to the next slide, please? So just a little bit about this property. In terms of the legal description, now, if you recall, we ran into an issue where historically the town had 6 parking spots on Riverview Avenue, and I'll show a map in a moment for the public and for you. That turns out there were some deed issues. Some of what's difficult about this property is it goes back to there being a lobster hatchery in the 20s. That was only accessible via water, and the original deed was terrible. And then in 1938, the hurricane wiped out some of the monuments, which made it more difficult to recreate things. However, we feel pretty firm on the title searches at this point. Timeline sequence going back, new owners of 66 Riverview engaged a surveyor to survey their property. Surveyors discovered that they owned part of the land that was thought to be owned by the town. town surveyor, we have an on-staff town surveyor, researched independently, came up with the same conclusion, and then we, if you recall, the property owner had placed rocks along that property to prohibit public from parking there. Title search was ordered, and we went through that process and matched slight differences, but essentially just matched the earlier findings. On August 3rd, the town council passed a resolution with the result being that the town council authorized the town attorney, town manager, and director of public works to preserve the town's rights and the disputed area of Riverview Avenue, including the right to pursue a legal remedy, but the direction was see what you can work out to bring back to the council if possible, anything. We have a new negotiated proposal that we'll be discussing tonight. And just of note, the town, there is reference in an old deed that there is a undefined easement across the property. So just, you know, it's not defined, you know, probably a walking, most likely a walking easement, but just, you know, there's something out there, but it's never been defined. Going on to the map, you see the general area of no ink. That red dot right there is the area on Riverview Avenue we're discussing. And on to the next one. And further on, just so you can get kind of the layout where you see Town of Groton's our property there. And let's go to the aerial on the next slide. The other way. And just down a little bit. And then the yellow lines are hard to see on there are what we had in our system for property lines. They are not accurate, though, as I've mentioned previously. What we had in the system was not accurate. As we go on to the survey, but I just want you to see kind of what it looks like with the rocky. Oh, just 1 sec.
Whose pier is that? I'm sorry.
1 sec. So you can go back to stand there for just a second.
So on that aerial is what you want him to stop at, right?
Right.
Okay.
Just so you kind of get a feel for that rocky coastline there, that much of the property is rocky. By the way, that old dock that's out there, it has been removed. There was some other work done in the neighboring area, and it was removed at some point before we had to do anything with it.
Which one is gone now, Mr.?
I believe it's that little one that you see between the
second
big
one
ones,
from the
up
right?
towards the kind of the top right there, but not the big one, but below it.
Okay.
There
What's
was
the
an
one in front of the car?
unapproved dock there that disappeared a couple months ago. So problem solved.
Mr. Burt, before you go on, there's a couple of questions about ownership of the piers. So if you could just clarify who owns the pier in the upper right corner and who owns the pier in the bottom center.
Sure, and that will be resolved. Let me just pull up the survey.
I think that's what you guys
Neither of
were
the
asking.
piers are on town land.
Neither?
Neither
Okay.
are on town land. The one to the south, which is just beyond our property, that is Jordan Urbanski, who are part of who owns, you know, what's in dispute. And then going up, I believe DiBiase owns, and I do have Greg Hanover is on the line, and he's more of an expert on the history of this than I am. He's dealt with this for years. Greg, the long one to the north, is that the DiBiase dock, or who owns that?
Yes, to the north is the DiBiase dock.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Hanover.
So, and we'll see it better on a survey coming up in a moment. If you go on to the next, briefly to the next one, Sean. Just so you see, that's the property we're talking about. You can see the rocks put in place here, just so people kind of know what it looks like. And again, historically, there's been 6 parking spots there, though on I guess it would be the east side of it, it is starting to erode some, so it's getting a little iffy on 1 or 2 spots if you go out there. On to the next slide, please. And this is just seeing kind of having a yellow line that sticks out a little bit more so you can see what we're, that kind of area, but it'll become more clear in the next slide. On to the next slide, please.
Is that accurate, Mr. Burt?
No. The next one's accurate. The next one's existing. Now, the town owns everything in yellow. Urbanski Jordan owns the part in orange, which is pretty much the parking area, whereas we own mostly the rocks and a little bit of partial parking towards the ceiling. But so we own all the rocks and a little bit more. So this is accurate existing for what's out there now. Now, if we go on to the next slide, This is what the town council had looked at previously, the original offer, not what we're talking about tonight, but the original offer where they wanted to basically get 3 of the parking spots, though that side's the part that is a little iffy on getting 3 into it. And going down. Go down to the next one, Sean. This is the current proposal in terms of their proposal and what was negotiated for potential swap. As you can see there, they're proposing that little triangle that we own to kind of square off or, finish off their piece on the south there. If you see that green triangle, the orange are rocks up to the north. They own inland of that, so they would join up their property. But they do want a little sliver on the east side there so that they can, there's essentially an agreement between DiBiase, Greg, and Urbanski, Jordan, as to where there's some rights there with that other dock. So in order for a dock to be placed on this, where the orange piece is, they need a little bit of a different, what's the word I'm looking for? The easement?
The riparian line?
Yeah, riparian line, thank you. Blinked on me.
Yeah.
So they would need that a little bit of shift in order to get a dock into there. So that's the current proposal, is a even swap. If we go on to let's just let Ling see. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just had a point of clarification. So the yellow is who's owning and the orange is what again, just to verify?
Yeah, yellow is what they own that would come to the town, so that we get the parking back. And, which would really be 5 spaces to do it. But the orange and green, the little triangle of green on the south, or the west side, and the orange on the east side would go to Urbanski, Jordan, and they own on each side of our property. So they own through here, they own through this up here, and they own this.
So then the dock to the north is on the Urbanski property or north of the Urbanski property in the upper right corner?
North of it.
Okay.
DiBiase's property starts right after Urbanski's, just up above that.
Okay, and the Urbanski dock is indicated in this vertical line?
To the west.
Okay, very good, thank you.
And looking on this other piece here to be able to get something to that orange piece, to be able to get a dock in there. We'll go on to the next slide.
Can I just ask a quick point of clarification on this?
Oh, stay 1 second. Yeah, go to the next one. It's a little bit closer up.
So what we owned and what the proposal is, what's the difference in, if you want to say square feet?
Greg, do you remember offhand? They're not far off from each other. And as part of any process, we'd have to have appraisals done, and I'll go into what we would have to do if we wanted to.
So are we?
Okay, that was point of clarification. Go ahead, Mr. Burt, finish, please.
I just wanted to, my end to that was, are we keeping the same amount, or is it?
We don't know that yet, so.
We don't know.
Mr. Burt, go ahead and finish, please.
We need the legal description and the appraisal, but you can see they're not far off.
Okay. Thank you.
Theirs is likely to be more valuable than ours, but, and then moving down, Sean, please. Now, in terms of kind of some of the options, now, before we do anything, I suggest we have a solicit public input. So I'm not asking for any, I'm just kind of saying for future what will have to be decided. I'd like to hear from people knowing, what their thoughts are on the current proposal. And as we know, kind of the alternative is to, if we were going to take a legal route, would be more of a pursuing a prescriptive easement. That's the kind of the other route. So do nothing, leave everything as is without access. Doing nothing but pursuing the definition of the pedestrian easement. Pursuing the land swap as proposed. And I don't see doing further negotiations. It's this, basically, and we'll move on to the legal stage, or pursue legal redress, likely through prescriptive easement, not likely through adverse possession. But I would like to hear, I get regular emails from people in the Wink about this, and I'd like to, maybe schedule a actual public hearing to give them, a chance to come out and speak.
And I forwarded one email today that I received just today. Okay, we have.
They're very interested in this.
Yes, and I think it's important that we hear. So it's good that we have a council meeting coming up. That way everybody will be able to turn out and
Yeah,
talk to
there'll
us.
be comments then, but then we'll need to do a resolution if we want to set an actual. Now, do you
Yeah,
just
if
want,
we
does the
decide
council want to do both? I mean, obviously there'll be comment at the next regular
Right.
council meeting, but then also set a public hearing or not?
Yes, I would.
In which
So
case-
we will need a public hearing if we decide to
Well,
get
later
rid
you
of
would
any
also need-
town-owned
right.
property, right?
Right, you would need that also. I'm
Yeah.
suggesting you might want to do one
Prior to that.
prior to that, right?
Okay, let's hear from councilors. We've got Councilors Aubrey, Baumgardner, and Bordelon. Councilor Aubrey?
Okay, can we go back to the map, please?
The
Right
proposed
there,
swap?
right there is
Oh,
fine.
right there.
That's okay. Now, I see the yellow area.
Can you
This-
pull your mic closer, please? That way we can hear. Thank you.
Do
Need you to be louder, Councilor.
Do that. Okay. Where the yellow is, does that include the waterfront?
No, the waterfront is, you can see the parking lines here kind of go to right here.
Yeah.
We have rocks right here, basically, all kind of, I guess it's all for here. Up to here. So the water's right here.
And who owns that?
This,
Yeah.
we own this, they own this.
Okay, so the yellow should come down if we were to be working with that area, then we would have the waterfront in front of the parking area.
Right, we already have the waterfront, we don't have parking.
Okay. And when we talked about this before, we said that we wanted to pursue adverse possession.
Well, you said legal remedies, but right.
Well,
Yeah, I was directed to first see what we can negotiate, and then otherwise I was authorized to pursue legal remedies. And talk with attorneys, it's likely to be the prescriptive.
I don't want that answer right now, John.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. We, as a council, sat and discussed this, and we were pretty strong in the fact that we wanted to look at this continuing to be Groton property, because we felt that it had been openly used as Groton property for the amount of years that's necessary. It had been continuous, all the things that are needed for a property to be deeded to the person using it. Now we're talking about this division, and you keep referring to it as his property. Now, at the beginning of your conversation, you said there were no deeds, the things had been lost by storms. So why are we referring to it as his property?
That's what we find in our research, as well as what the independent title searchers, we do believe it is theirs.
By what? If you didn't have deeds.
I'm just saying the early deed was difficult, and that's in the monuments, some of the things were lost. If you remember, Eric Callahan kind of went through all that in the past. I would have to bring him in, but he was confident that we don't own it, and our staff is. And Greg, if you have anything to add on to that?
No, I think you covered it, John, but, our land surveyor and also the, Mr. Jordan's land surveyor reviewed this extensively. We agree, based on the research and, what deeds we could find and all the history and what is out in the field, that, what the plan shows is we feel is accurate. That the town owns parcels A, B, and C, which are the yellow ones, and then Mr. Jordan owns parcel D.
He's talking about that earlier map where ours were all in yellow, not this map.
Yeah, I can't see which map you have up on the screen.
Right now, it's the proposed lot. So it'd be the white, green, and orange.
Okay, how does that compare to what we've been using? If we were to do an overlay, how would that compare?
Pretty much matches up in terms of what we've been using. This is only rocks right here. We don't use this.
Yeah.
Other than that illegal dock was over on here.
Yeah.
That's gone now. So this is just rocks. There's nothing else. We've never used that. This is the area we've used. So we would have access to the area we use other than, here's the, other than this, but a part of the sliver here so that they can get back in.
All right, if you continue that yellow up over the red, if you were looking at that piece of property.
From here?
Yeah.
They own it. They've always owned it. That's not in question. And that's, we've never used this piece up here. There's no parking there. They own the land, and that's always been the case. It's never been in dispute. The map's always shown that accurately.
How was that?
Well, it's the rocky area through here. So the water is really right here.
Yeah.
So we own the rock area, they own this land along the road. So we never access it because you have to go through private property to get to it. Unless you want to walk across the rocks to get up there. You want to go back maybe Sean to the aerial on this? It seems like you can see how rocky this all is. So a lot of our property are the rocks.
Well, personally,
There's the parking, they own most of the parking.
Okay.
But this, let's see,
I'm sorry, Councilor Melendez, I'm sorry. I'm not sure. Mr. Burr, Councilor Melendez had a good point. We're not sure if the people at home would be able to hear you.
Sorry about that.
Thank you, Councilor Melendez.
Okay. So kind of, this basically incorporates this outline. Like I said, this is not accurate. Remember that the line's really more like that. But just looking at this general area, forget the yellow line. This right here has always been private right here, but we owned a strip right. So we own these rocks right here, but we've never accessed it because this has always been private. We've never used that for public access. These are the parking areas right through here that we've used. So basically these right here, that's through here, stopping before the, it's kind of in through here. So people pull up right here to park. They've never used this at all. It's always been private.
that's always been private?
Yeah. Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that correct?
I don't know if he knows what you're pointing at,
sorry.
Mr. Bird.
Sorry. If you're looking at the actual, if you look at the original ownership, one second.
So the original?
Yeah, pull up the original. This is a better one to use. This is a better one to use. So through here, essentially, kind of roughly like that. That's essentially what we own this side. They clearly own that. We've never accessed this right here. Parking's only been from over. So here are the 6 spots right here. So they can put their own dock in. That's the kind of the point of what they're seeking. And to get that, they would trade the parking spots.
Well, I think I'll wait for the public hearing, and then I don't like to give up any kind of waterfront.
Yeah, and
I don't care if it's
direction of the
rock
council. I was directed to first see what I can negotiate, bring it back to the council.
It's too important, and but I think it's important that we listen to the people that have feelings about it and have opinions on it. But I think it was clearly used by us, and I think it belongs to the town. But I'll let other people determine my final. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, Councilor Baumgartner, you're next.
Yes, I too agree. There should be a public hearing, should we go the route of any form of a land swap, but I would definitely agree, we should continue to do our due diligence and research to determine the ownership of all of those parcels. With that said, it's my understanding that there were boulders placed earlier on this year. I don't know the precise time when that took place, but is it true that the boulders for much of the summer and fall folks have not been able to park where typically they have been able to? all right. And in some ways, actually, that, I shouldn't say that is a blessing in disguise, but ideally, you would want that space to be used as a place where people can congregate or people can, enjoy, as opposed to cars occupying that space, and especially since that is an area that is heavily commercialized in the summer with restaurants. Folks may be, looking to find a close parking spot as opposed to actually, and so may utilize that to park, to go to a restaurant, whereas if they could park on the street, maybe a little further from the restaurant and can walk. So long term, I think we ought to explore, whether we can make that space a more livable and enjoyable space for people to really enjoy the waterfront, as Councilor Aubry suggested. Once you lose waterfront like that, you're never going to get it back. But I appreciate your suggestion that we should have a preemptive public hearing, and nothing further. Thank you.
And just to mention, if you are interested in scheduling a public hearing, it'd be good to have a motion, because then I can bring a resolution on the next council meeting to set a public hearing.
Thank you.
Councilor Bordelon?
Thank you. I too think it's important to make sure we do have a public hearing first to let the community see these graphs, reflect these graphs, and kind of digest it, and then come back and let us know what they're thinking. I mean, these are rough sketches, so it's hard to see. I can see pros and cons of both. I see that, that one section, as stated, is not really usable by us. Maybe at best, if we put a boardwalk there that was overhanging, then folks could kind of like walk along that area along the water. Once again, it would be great to have the numbers of how much space we are possibly owning based on what we have researched, what they own, and what the final numbers would be if we went with this proposal swap, to see exactly how that would measure up. So looking at that, or the graph that you used before, if I'm understanding it, John, this yellow here, the only area that would turn orange would be off to the corner, and what is yellow here and orange here would almost become yellow, and except for the sliver that came down.
Right.
So we'd actually have a parking spot if we chose to keep it parking, or a sitting area or whatever it was, but you'd also have direct access to the water. So I'm interested to see if this piece is actually bigger and greater than what we own. And that's, so that would be just one question that I would think of, but I just want to make sure whatever the proposal is, that we're getting the community input and that we're not losing anything, that it's enhancing the accessibility. And that's what I would like to see. But I think this is a great start to see. I appreciate that you guys have come to some agreement to, not take the other route, which would be very costly. And but if we have to go other routes, it's important to do such. And I think the community input. Is there any negotiations to, in the meantime, allow that to be a sitting area that folks could bring a chair and sit there and use that public space that
We've reached,
it's the spot that we do technically own, even though you can't park there. I mean, I think the concern from what I heard from folks is that it's blocked off and we can't use it at all. But if it's in fact true that we do own a piece of it, I don't know. It's kind of confusing, because actually now that I look at the map, if that owner owns this, then you would be crossing their property to get onto that spot.
we would have to go through the court action to get that easement defined. We haven't requested he voluntarily allow it.
Yeah.
If there was some forward progress with some swap, I think he'd allow it, but not until that point.
So, so I'd like to make a motion for a public hearing, if we could. Is that a simple motion, just stating that we'd like to have a public hearing?
Now the hard part is, we wouldn't pass the resolution till November, or whatever. What's 3rd, I think, is the date, and usually then you would set it for the next council meeting. However, that's a changeover. It'd be, I don't know if people are going to want a public hearing on the first night of a new council. So we'd have to think about the date.
Right, that's what I was,
The dates.
because it has to go through council to do the public hearing.
What's that?
We have to have it approved through council in order to schedule the public hearing, so that puts us on November 3rd. So if this body passed it through council on November 3rd, we could schedule it for the 9th.
Or 16th.
Or 16th.
You could.
And do it that way, but that's really the pleasure of the council, what you would like to do. We have councilors who'd like to speak, so I would just ask that you hold off on your motion until we
Sure,
have
that's
everybody
fine.
speak first,
Yeah.
please. You still have some time left. Did you want to take the rest of your time?
Just basically, I think it's great. I just want to hear from the community and, really kind of think about, every angle and get some more information about the demographics and square footage that we're gaining or losing. Thank you.
Okay.
And Mr. Hanover, can you reach out to, it might have to be through the attorneys, but to get a better survey? It would be nice to get that survey over, well, it's not even really a survey at this point, but to show it over an aerial so we can see visually what properties where for that swap.
Yeah, no, we can do that. And, I could answer Councilor Bordelon's questions on the area.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, yeah, okay, good.
I do have that information.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, the town currently owns parcels A, B, and C, and that totals 1,731 square feet. We would be giving parcels A and C, which total 677, which leaves us like 1,054, and then parcel D is 1,114. So we'd actually end up with 2,116. So we have a net gain of about 437 square feet when it's all said and done.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. That's what I was visualizing when I did rough numbers, thinking that we were actually gaining land.
Okay.
Yes, and it's certainly much more usable land.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Okay, Councilor Franco, you haven't spoken yet on this. You have the floor.
So I also have some issues with you saying that it's their property, because for probably, I don't know how many years, 50, 60, 70 years, whatever it's been, the community thought it was the town property, and we've maintained it. So for you to now say, because they did a survey, it's now their property, I understand, but we have maintained it this whole time with, and that's what the whole dispute is about. So to even say it's theirs.
We should just say the title search shows it's theirs.
So it sort of bothered me as well. I also think that with the rocks being there, because as it has been a community place for people to park and fish and do whatever they want, I still have problems with that the rocks are there, and that maybe we should have been moving forward to ask them to move them, and even if it takes our attorney to be doing that.
We did ask to our attorneys, and we don't have any right to force it, and they're not going to move it at this point.
And I would like to have the public hearing, and because it's not, at this point, it's not a mandatory public meeting, we don't have to have the proper notice of so many days, is that correct?
Correct, and I think there's still some flexibility as to methods because of the executive order anyways, but this is not an official one, no, so
it's not
wide
official,
open
so we
how
can
you
put
want
it
to do
out
it.
very
Yeah.
quickly and not do whatever the 30-day waiting period is and all that other things
Correct.
that we have to normally do, is that correct? So I would be in favor of a public hearing, and yeah, because I do have some issues with some of this, so I would wait till the public hearing and then make my decisions afterwards. Thank you. Oh, and one more thing. Would this packet with all this information be available to the public?
Yes, I'd like to get Greg's update where we can actually show the swap lines over the aerial so you can get a public and you can get a better idea. But yes, we would make everything available. And
that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. And then just as a recommendation for a possible date for a public hearing, the 16th is your currently scheduled last meeting. Now, at least, I don't know if you're thinking a special council that night also to wrap up things you've recommended both on the 9th and 16th or not. But you could, well, I hate to hamstring you. I would say if you did it on the 9th, you could actually take some sort of action if you wanted on the 16th, if you held that public hearing on the 9th. If you wanted to direct staff to whatever you wanted to do, but I just thought it might give you a little more flexibility if you hold it on the 9th.
So I'm going to take my turn and just offer an alternative, and you can tell me if you think it would work. rather than doing a public hearing, could we do something like we've done in the past with the Groton Long Point Bridge, or we've done with the plastics ordinance, where we've opened up a public building and we've had a member of town staff present something, like Mr. Hanover could present the accurate maps and the accurate aerials and say, this is what's suggested, and we could have people come out and they could talk to us, they could leave suggestions, they would be able to hear everything, and then we could schedule that in much more quickly than we could with a public hearing. And we would have the opportunity to get feedback from the community in a timely manner, rather than labeling it a public hearing and having to go through the council. So I'm not sure if that would be acceptable to the council, or if you'd prefer the formal public hearing, but that would be a way, and we've done it before with other things, as kind of a preliminary outreach. You could just call it a public outreach at that point, in order to start getting, there are people eager to talk about this to us, and I would like to give them that opportunity while we still have that chance. So that would be my suggestion. Councilor Baumgardner had his hand up for a second time.
Yeah, I meant to ask what role the Knowing Planning and Zoning Commission would play in this.
They don't have an official role, but they've been updated along the way. And actually, as soon as I received this swap, I'd also sent it to them, at least to their the header. There's, I can't remember, who's the chair, vice chair, but I've been sending it to the fire department, and they've been sharing with them. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they're going to weigh in heavily, I'm sure. There's no official role, though, because I don't think we'd have. Greg, do you know of anything they have to do for property swapping, like combining and?
As far as the zoning goes?
Yeah, I don't know of anything that has to go there. I'd want to double check with the attorney, though, so I don't want to.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know of anything, but I don't want to 100% commit to that.
And I completely agree. I understand the boulders were placed to obstruct public access, and that is very problematic to me. Considering that for decades, residents thought that was public space. So if we can rectify this as soon as possible. And thank you again, Manager Burt and Director Hanover, for your work on this.
Councilor Parker?
For the open format that you suggested, can it still be filmed?
Sure.
That would probably be better, because then we can still hear the questions and people can come up to the podium and maybe have the pictures enlarged, then everybody can see what everybody's talking about. I mean, we can see it here on our packets, but I think a general bigger picture would be able to get the public involvement, and maybe have note cards or something out for them to say, hey, my suggestion is this or that, just to gain more public input.
The only thing I have to make clear is, we're not, it's a negotiated deal, so it's going to be kind of lawsuit or, so it's not like, well, I want you to change this piece over to here, and, so we'll have to make it clear what the expectations are. And I've had to arrange with the attorney. I definitely would want Eric there, since he's done a lot of research on this. We'd have to arrange with him for a date.
I'm good.
Okay. We have Councilor Franco and Bordelon for second time. Councilor Melendez or he, did either of you wish to speak for the first time? Okay, so we will go Franco, and then we'll end with Bordelon, and you could do your motion if you prefer at that point. Councilor Franco?
I would prefer the public hearing. And the reason I'm stating this is because we have had public open educational forums on even property in town, and the huge complaint I'm hearing regarding one issue is that we didn't have a public hearing prior to signing a development agreement. So regardless if we had an educational, informational meeting with the public, it was in the newspaper, they still said you didn't do a public hearing. So I would prefer a public hearing where it's actually in the newspaper and it's saying, here's your public hearing, you have the right to come out and speak on this matter and have your say. And it's much, although we can do it in a way that's not as formal as what a statute does, I think it's want to have their say on something. Thank you.
Okay, Counselor Bordelon.
Thank you. I also think that it would be important to add these numbers of the square footage that we discussed. I think it'd be great to have the square footage of what we own, they own, and what could own, and those numbers on the charts. I think we take it a step further. I think we do a non-formal gathering, maybe an hour before the public hearing, so folks can come out early, and counselors can come to that if they choose, but staff would be present, like Greg Hanover. The poster boards would be up. They can peruse those a little bit, maybe clarifying questions, and then we'd go into a formal public comment, as Counselor Franco had stated, which I do agree with. I think it's better to have it on the record, because long after whatever council was stated, the motion on this, I think to have it as transparent as possible and recorded would be for the benefit of everybody. But I think having the ability to have the poster boards up, say, at 5 o'clock, till 6:30, people can kind of come in at their own leisure, or 6 o'clock, and then at 6:30 we go into the public comment, but have those boards up in the foyer or inside so people can see them and they're available, and people can ask those questions in real time and be ready to speak. That's just a thought, and I think it would save a lot of time. So I think there's a way that we can do both and have an informal and a formal process for this. So that would be my recommendation. And definitely adding the square footage of, what those parcels would become, what they are independently, so that folks, can understand what the scale really is. So I guess I would make a motion to have a informal public presentation that would open up for anybody who'd like to come out with poster boards and information on this proposal, followed by a public hearing on such date, which was stated, I forget if you said the 9th or the...
We're going to have to look at the calendar. So you're motioning for an informal session,
Yep.
followed by a public hearing?
Yep.
I'll second it.
Okay, hold on.
What was the wording on that again?
So that was moved by Bordelon and seconded by Baumgartner?
Thank you.
Yes.
Can you read that?
I just wrote, I don't have your language.
No,
It's
you're
just
fine.
a motion for an informational session followed by a public hearing.
Perfect. Thank you.
And that was moved by Bordelon and seconded by Baumgartner.
And I'm sorry, did you say that you were going to make sure the attorney can be here?
Yes, I'll have to check with his schedule.
Right, so we'll have to look at the dates, but we can, you can email us after you've spoken to the attorney. But we need to vote on this first, so is there a discussion? Oh, okay, thank you. Is Councilor Heed down below on that list? It doesn't look like it. It looks like there's a big gap. So we're at 8 counselors right now, as of 9:58, so we can do this really quickly. Well, it's okay, we're on the same item, so. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, we will vote on it. Okay, so all those in favor of the motion for an informational session followed by a public hearing regarding 0 Riverview Avenue, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? So moved unanimously with 8 counselors.
Is Counselor Zapiri there?
I'm only seeing, oh, that's right, so we're at 7 counselors. Thank you, good catch. My apologies, yes, we're at 7 counselors. I don't know when Counselor Zapiri dropped off, though, so we're at 7 then. Okay, all right, great. It is
Thank you, Greg.
close, it's close. For 1 minute, and then we need a consensus. Councilor Parker.
I just want to announce there is a chili cook-off this Saturday, the 16th, here. It is on the Parks and Rec website. If you need any further, I don't have it on me. I can share it on the Facebook page. And on Sunday, October 17th, Safe Futures will be having their walk. It starts at 9 a.m. and it will be at Waterford High School. It's a 4K. Don't ask me how many miles that is, so I don't know that part. But I support the cause for, it's the Domestic Violence Month this month, so if you can come out and support, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
And now both of those events are fundraisers, correct? The Chili Cook-Off is a
Yes.
fundraiser. What is the charity that receives the funds from the Chili Cook-Off?
I do not
Where's
have
Cindy
that.
Olson when you need her?
I saw her this evening coming in. I will get that information and ensure that it's posted somewhere.
Very good. So they're both charitable events that we're looking for the community to support. Thank you. Councilor Baumgartner, did you have something, other business?
I know Councilor Melendez mentioned this. I did want to formally move that we reconsider taking up the land conveyance tax issue.
Second?
Hold on.
Or the, I should say vote instead of
Yes.
issue.
Reconsideration.
And we need 6, I think.
Yes.
I think we need 6. So Councilor Baumgartner, motion, is reconsider the right word? I don't think it's reconsider.
Yes.
It was, and I don't know where I left all my papers that I had that written in.
Don't you
Hold
need
on.
to be in the favorable side?
No, that's,
Well, since it was
because it's not
split-
reconsider. All right, hold on. What meeting was that? Was that the
Last
18th?
meeting, I think we went 4 and 4.
28th, maybe? Oh, and that was conveyance. Debt policy management, not that one. September 14th, October 5th. Anybody, if you have the date, I would
It
appreciate it.
is
'cause then I
October
could find it.
5th. It was a special committee of the whole meeting,
It was a separate
October-
small packet, very thin.
October 5th.
Oh, yeah, it was a supplemental.
It was additional.
Okay, so, Rule 8.G.2, council can recommend the reconsider the referral with 6 votes in favor. So we need 6 votes in favor in order to do that as per Rule 8.G. Roman numeral 2.
Can we have a reminder of how we ended up with that? Wasn't that a 4 and 4 split?
441.
It was
441.
441. Okay, so let me say it again. It was moved by Baumgartner that we take up the land conveyance tax again. And was there a second on that?
That was me.
Counselor Parker seconded. Okay,
We can do this
so,
new business?
Other business, yes.
so then we would
I
need
thought it was just to
6
put it on the agenda.
favorable votes to take up this item, or to have this item, I guess, recommended to Committee of the Whole. Okay? So all those in favor of having this conveyance tax item go back to Committee of the Whole, please raise your hand. Baumgartner, Parker, Granatowski, Bordelon, Melendez, and Mr. Greeley, are any counselors online?
No.
Okay, so we have 5 in favor, 2 opposed, or any opposed? Franco and Overy, and I believe there are no abstentions, so that fails. 5 in favor, 2 opposed, 0 abstentions. Is it majority of present or majority of the body? Ay, ay, ay. Hold on. This one doesn't help.
To bring something back after it's been decided we need 6, it's explicitly said 6.
6.
Because it's rules and not Robert's rules.
Correct.
Right, thank you. So that fails. Okay, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I have my hand up before the vote.
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to check with John Bird about King property contamination.
I did send
It was-
something out.
Oh, perfect. Okay, perfect. I haven't gone there today.
It was late in the day. so-
All right, I missed it on my way. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Just one thing, can we be sure that the correct information goes out to the local attorneys?
On which item?
On the last one that we just voted on, because the wrong information went out before.
Oh, I'm sorry, Riverview Avenue?
No, I'm sorry, the conveyance tax.
Conveyance tax.
You mean, ask the town clerk to make sure that it's not being collected?
Yeah, because I sent you that information from the attorney.
Yes, no, I can ask her to correct that now.
Counselor Franco?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Franco and seconded by Parker to adjourn. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye. 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 Opposed? Abstentions? So moved unanimously at 10:05. And we are at 7 counselors. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.